Upon returning to his senses, Fu Nanhua immediately inspected his surroundings in a meticulous fashion, even going as far as to inspect the rooftops of the surrounding houses. After ensuring that there were no further threats in the immediate vicinity, he quickly took a deep breath, and he didn't stride forward, nor did he retreat. He reflexively made a grab for his jade pendant once again, only to grasp onto thin air, and he hurriedly recited an incompletely Taoist mantra. This wasn't a mystical ability, it was simply something that he was doing to help himself calm down. If his heart were analogous to a small boat floating on a lake, then this mantra served as an anchor for the boat. He began to turn to the side so that his back was facing a wall, then strode laterally to the crossroads between the two alleys. Every muscle in his entire body was tensed up, and he was in a defensive posture, not daring to let down his guard even for a split second. He was staring intently into the alley, where Chen Ping'an was standing next to Kai Jinjian, who was laying in a puddle of her own blood. His body was arched forward slightly in an aggressive posture, and he was also staring intently back at Fu Nanhua. It was a tense confrontation between the two men, and Fu Nanhua wanted to know why Chen Ping'an had done what he did, while Chen Ping'an was simply trying to survive. Kai Jinjian had been Chen Ping'an's only target, but with Fu Nanhua also on the scene, Chen Ping'an reflexively adopted an aggressive posture, more so out of self-preservation than anything else. "You killed her?" Fu Nanhua asked, even though the answer was obvious. Chen Ping'an remained silent as he continued to hold onto the murder weapon, which was a porcelain shard that was slightly smaller than the palm of his hand. The exposed tip of the porcelain shard was extremely sharp, and his hand was covered in blood. It was unclear whether the blood belonged to Kai Jinjian, or was the result of the porcelain shard piercing into the palm of his hand. After looking around to ensure that there was no one else nearby, Fu Nanhua was struck by a sense of absurdity, but at the same time, he also felt as if a heavy load had been lifted off his shoulders. In the end, his gaze fell upon Kai Jinjian. Even in her terrible condition, her natural beauty was still very apparent. Her voluptuous chest was rising and falling ever so slightly, while blood was gushing incessantly out of her neck and mouth. Her life was about to come to an end, but due to how resilient her body was from her years of cultivation, she was going to suffer a more painful and prolonged death than the average person would in her condition. A faint smile appeared on Fu Nanhua's face, but there was a bone-chilling gleam in his eyes as he asked, "Why did you kill her? There was no bad blood between you and her. Did you kill her just because she played a prank on you in Clayvase Alley? Since when did this town become such a lawless place? Have you not heard of the concept of an eye for an eye? If you kill someone, then you have to pay with your life. This is a rule that's set in stone and rings true no matter where you go." Chen Ping'an remained silent as if he were mute, and Fu Nanhua began to slowly advance toward him in a resolute and steady manner, paying no heed to what Chen Ping'an was thinking. He knew that there was no saving Kai Jinjian. This wasn't Dawn Cloud Mountain, where immortal energy was available in great abundance. This was an immortal prison where all mystical abilities were restricted, and the only way that she could be saved would be if an almighty terrestrial god or a golden arhat were willing to sacrifice a majority of their cultivation base to capture her soul and revive her from the dead. Unfortunately for Kai Jinjian, such a massive blessing was not going to fall upon her. The sage in the town had a very important duty, resembling a deity that ruled over the town, and there was no way that he would interfere with the natural order just to save someone's life. On the path of cultivation, there were always cases where exceptional prodigies perished under unexpected circumstances. It wasn't exactly a commonplace occurrence, but it definitely wasn't all that rare either. If one could attain immortality by simply progressing at a slow and steady rate, avoiding all risks while enjoying all of the benefits of cultivation, then the ultimate goal of immortality would be far too easy to come by for it to have any substantial meaning. Hence, prior to entering the town, Fu Nanhua was already prepared for the worst, steeling himself to fight for his life if it became necessary to do so, however. He certainly hadn't anticipated that his temporary ally would be killed in such an abrupt and brutal fashion right under the nose of a sage. In fact, this was the first time that he had ever experienced something like this. There were no powerful immortal treasures used, nor any earth-shattering mystical abilities deployed. In what seemed like no more than the blink of an eye, Cai Jinjian had been slain by the lowliest of peasants. Fu Nanhua was astonished by what he had just witnessed, and he was struggling to come to terms with this absurd reality. If they had been anywhere outside of this town, it would have been the greatest of honors for an ant like Qin Ping'an to even catch a glimpse of Cai Jinjian from afar. Fu Nanhua wore a solemn expression as he declared, "I am unable to save Celestial Maiden Cai, nor am I able to kill you in order to avenge her. But if word were to spread that I simply stood by and did nothing after witnessing you murdering my ally in cold blood right in front of my very eyes, then the reputation of our old dragon city would be swept to the ground. Hence, I must teach you a lesson no matter what." As for what Dawn Cloud Mountain is going to do in response to the tragic passing of Celestial Maiden Cai, that's something for you to worry about. This grandiose speech from Fu Nanhua was intended to be heard by the sages overseeing this place. He was laying out his reasons to the sages in advance in order to claim the moral high ground so that he would be justified in punishing Qin Ping'an. There was also a chance that at some point in the future, the esteemed elders of Dawn Cloud Mountain were also going to be made aware of what he had said here, and he wanted to make it seem as if he had done everything he could for Cai Jinjian. Otherwise, given how he had already made up his mind to kill Cai Jinjian, he really should have been thanking Qin Ping'an for doing the job in his stead. Thanks to Qin Ping'an's bold and reckless actions, Fu Nanhua had been saved a great deal of hassle, and despite his solemn expression, he was internally ecstatic. Fu Nanhua continued to approach Qin Ping'an as he said, "Judging from your movements just now, it seems like you possess explosiveness that's superior even to the average grown man. That is quite a rare trait in someone as young as yourself. If you hadn't done what you just did, perhaps you could have joined an army. Given your courage and resolve, with some luck, perhaps you could have caught the fancy of a powerful martial artist or a high-ranking general and been rewarded with a body refinement cultivation method. If such an opportunity had come your way, you could have undergone a complete transformation after 2 or 3 decades." While Fu Nanhua was advancing toward Qin Ping'an, the latter began to slowly retreat while still facing the former. The tall and handsome Fu Nanhua was giving off a natural regal aura as he made his way down the alley. Fu Nanhua extended a hand forward with the palm facing down, and it was hovering around waist height as he smiled and mused, "It's a pity that you simply aren't blessed by good fortune. Otherwise, if you had been able to follow the path that I just envisioned for you, the height of your achievements could have reached about here. Well, no, even then, that would have been impossible for you." Fu Nanhua was very much amused by his own joke, and his smile grew even wider. Right as he took another step forward, he suddenly stopped so that his foot was suspended around half a foot above the ground, and he concluded, "My apologies, I meant that this could have been the height of your ceiling." It was difficult for Fu Nanhua not to be ecstatic. After entering the town, he had made a deal with Song Jisun that had reaped him far greater rewards than he had originally anticipated. After that, Cai Jinjian, who could have very likely become a hindrance on his path to pursuing the Great Tao, had been killed right before his very eyes. Not only were his hands clean of her blood, he could take the 2 pouches of gold essence copper coins in her possession free of charge, and perhaps he would even be able to find a couple of secret treasures from Dawn Cloud Mountain on her body. Even if those treasures weren't the best that Dawn Cloud Mountain had to offer, they definitely wouldn't have been far from that caliber. He was confident that Cai Jinjian wouldn't have entered the town without any treasures to protect her. As an example, he was carrying a pair of extremely powerful treasures himself. Aside from that old dragon Rainbringer, which was nothing more than a red herring, the other treasures in his possession were just about the best that old dragon city had to offer. Hence, there was a popular saying among shady and disreputable cultivators, which was that there were sure to be rewards to be reaped from burying the dead. While passing by Cai Jinjian's body, Fu Nanhua didn't even take a single glance at her. Instead of feeling fearful from the scent of blood in the air, it only served to evoke a sense of excitement within him. With Fu Nanhua making his way toward Qin Ping'an, while the latter continued to back away, a gap of around a dozen meters was maintained between them. All Fu Nanhua had to do was ensure that Qin Ping'an couldn't escape from the alley. Otherwise, it would be next to impossible for him to catch Qin Ping'an, given that he had grown up his entire life here and knew the layout of the town like the back of his hand. Furthermore, the lifeless body of Cai Jinjian was a prime example of what the unassuming Qin Ping'an was capable of. If he allowed Qin Ping'an to get away and catch his breath, there was a chance that he could end up following in Cai Jinjian's footsteps. It seemed like Fu Nanhua was a hunter that was casually stalking his prey, but in reality, he was adjusting the rhythm of his own body. After all, ever since he had officially embarked on the path of cultivation at 9 years of age, he had never had to win a battle that was purely a physical brawl. Of course, he wasn't going to fight Qin Ping'an to the death, as that would be extremely foolish. Having already secured a fated opportunity from Song Jisun, there was another one waiting for him in the form of Cai Jinjian. However, Qin Ping'an was very volatile and unpredictable, and he had to ensure that the boy would be bedridden for the near future so that he wouldn't be able to meddle any further in his plans. With that in mind, Fu Nanhua suddenly smiled and asked, "What was your name again?" Even though Qin Ping'an's hand was still bleeding profusely, the look on his face was as resilient as the weeds in the wilderness, and he offered a response completely unrelated to Fu Nanhua's questions. "Don't try to trick me. I have really good eyesight, so I can tell that the way you're looking at me now is the exact same way that she was looking at me while she was talking to me in Clayvase Alley." Fu Nanhua faltered slightly upon hearing this, and he was feeling very impressed by Qin Ping'an as he chuckled. How interesting. Fu Nanhua appeared to be quite casual and relaxed in his speech and demeanor, but in reality, he had been keeping tabs on Qin Ping'an's profusely bleeding left hand this entire time. The fact that it was still bleeding indicated that he hadn't relaxed his grip on the porcelain shard, even for a second, and the average person would have most likely already dropped the shard, unable to bear the agony. Earlier, Fu Nanhua had only been lamenting Qin Ping'an's ill fortune in jest, but now, he was beginning to realize that Qin Ping'an really could have had a bright future ahead had his circumstances been more fortunate. In Fu Nanhua's eyes, it was about time that he made a move, so he asked one final question that he was interested in. "The fact that you killed her so decisively must have meant that someone told you what she did to you earlier. I'm not curious about who that person is. Instead, what I want to know is how a child like you, who grew up your entire life in this town, was able to get over the mental hurdles so quickly and kill someone with such a clear conscience. Do you understand what I'm asking? Even back when I claimed my first kill, I began trembling after the adrenaline and excitement faded, and I had to recite calming mantras for a very long time before I felt slightly better, yet you did it as if you were simply taking a stroll or having a meal. It just doesn't make sense." Qin Ping'an's face had been completely devoid of expression this entire time, but all of a sudden, a look of shock and horror appeared on his face as he stared past Fu Nanhua, as if Cai Jinjian had suddenly returned from the dead. The cautious and careful Fu Nanhua reflexively turned around, but after turning halfway around, it dawned on him that he had been tricked. By the time he turned back around, Qin Ping'an was already nowhere to be seen. As it turned out, in the same instant that Qin Ping'an had put on that shocked and horrified expression, he had immediately begun charging at Fu Nanhua. After taking 3 steps, he took off forcefully using his left foot, launching himself high up into the air, then pushed off from one of the walls that lined the alley using his right foot. As a result, he was able to rapidly change direction, pouncing at Fu Nanhua with his left hand raised up high. In that instant, he truly resembled an eagle that was hunting a snake. The private school was a small cottage that had no plaque hanging above the entrance, and inside the cottage, Qi Jingjun was in the process of playing out a game of Go according to a manual. It wasn't a historically renowned game, nor was it even a game played between masters. Right as he was about to place a white stone onto the Go board, he suddenly heaved a faint sigh. Even though he was following a manual of set moves, he suddenly seemed to have grown rather hesitant about where to place the stone down, and in the end, he withdrew his hand, but the stone was still hovering in midair over an inch above the Go board. Qi Jingjun remained seated in an upright manner. As the current sage responsible for overseeing this place, and the former master of Mountain Cliff Academy, one of the 72 academies of Confucianism, He was still indisputably one of the purest and most knowledgeable scholars under the heavens, even though he had been condemned to this town in order to atone for his past crimes. In the eyes of the normal townsfolk, the years passed by one after another, and during this past cycle of 60 years, the school teacher had been replaced quite a few times. Each successive teacher had a different age and appearance compared to their predecessor, but that indescribable scholarly aura was something that had been common to all of them. They were stern, dogmatic, quiet. Essentially, all of them had been quite bland and boring. No one would have imagined that all of the school teachers who had come and gone from the town had actually been the same person. Not only that, but in the vast world outside of the town, the quiet and unassuming Mr. Qi had once been a figure of unfathomably lofty status, possessing peerless mystical powers of righteousness. In the next instant, Qi Jingquan's soul left his body in the form of an immortal in flowing white robes, instantly freeing itself from the confines of his body as it drifted toward a certain alley in the town. In the blink of an eye, Qi Jingquan arrived at his destination, and he first took a glance at Kai Jinjian, who was laying in a puddle of her own blood, while her soul was wavering and flickering like a dying flame in the wind. After pausing there momentarily, he arrived beside Qin Pinyin and Fu Nanhua. Fu Nanhua was leaning back slightly with his mouth and eyes gaped wide open, and a complex combination of shock, confusion, and despair etched on his handsome face. As for Qin Pinyin, he was suspended in midair, maintaining a forward pouncing posture. There was a porcelain shard that was as sharp as a blade in his left hand, and even in this life and death situation, his eyes were still as calm and resolute as ever, completely unlike the expression one would expect to see in a situation like this on the face of an ignorant young boy who had grown up in a secluded little town his entire life. The only thing that seemed to fit with his character was the resignation that was hidden deep within his eyes. This type of resignation wasn't unfamiliar to Qi Jingquan. It was the exact same emotion displayed by a farmer who relied on the will of the heavens for his livelihood. In seasons of drought, the farmer would squat down on the dry, cracked, and barren earth of his farmland, looking up at the scorching sun. In situations like those, there would be no heart-wrenching emotions of despair, fury, or indignation in the farmer's eyes, only a deep sense of resignation and helplessness. As the temporary master of this place, Qi Jingquan was naturally aware of the history of Qin Pingyin's family. Even though he hadn't personally seen Qin Pingyin's ancestors, he was able to roughly deduce the family's history going back centuries, even over 1,000 years in the past. The reason for this was very simple. It was just like if the magistrate of a county administration wanted to see the family history of one of the residents of the county. All he would have to do would be to pull up that person's file from the Ministry of Revenue, which held all of the county's family registries, and everything would be laid out before him. Throughout the past 3,000 years of the town's development, it had extended its branches far out of the town's boundaries. Every single generation would always produce several prodigious talents, and even though they couldn't return to their homes, they could reciprocate their clans through secret avenues, and that was what had given rise to the current set of most affluent clans in the town. Qin Pingyin's clan had a long history, and his ancestors had always once lived in luxury and prosperity. However, following 2 periods of tumultuous and unforeseen change, the Chen clan gradually fell into decline on the eastern treasured Vile continent, which was home to countless empires and vassal states. As a result, it had been taken over by other clans, and by the time Qin Pingyin's father had been born, the Chen clan had already been in decline for over 1,000 years. It had well and truly fallen into decay on the entire eastern treasured Vile continent, let alone the Great Li Empire, in which the small town was situated. It was as if the clan had somehow been cursed and condemned to never be able to make a resurgence. During the 60 or so years after Qi Jingquan had arrived in the town to oversee the operation of the formation, he had strictly upheld the doctrines of fairness and objectivity, never altering the trajectories of the town residents' fate based on his own personal preferences. Otherwise, as a scholar who had once detested evil and upheld justice with all his heart, he would have been far too inclined to condemn the abundance of shady dealings taking place in the town's affluent clans, or to help the town's impoverished and suffering clans. However, through a lens of objectivity, Qi Jingjun was able to see that the affluent clans had their own hardships, while the impoverished clans were just as capable of evil. As time passed, Qi Jingjun had become a deity-like existence in the town, refusing to meddle in the affairs of the townsfolk. Instead, all he did was stand by and watch, with observation serving as his sole purpose. There was a hint of surprise on Qi Jingchun's face as he stepped forward to take a closer look, then gave a gentle nod of approval. As it turned out, even though it appeared that Chen Ping'an had pounced with the intention to kill, in the end, he had only slammed his wrist into Fu Nanhua's neck, which was a far more lenient fate than the one that Kai Jinjian had suffered. After receiving this heavy blow, Fu Nanhua's entire body was sent flying horizontally toward the wall, following which Chen Ping'an locked his hand around Fu Nanhua's neck while pressing the porcelain shard against his abdomen with his other hand. Qi Jingjun was rather curious about why Chen Ping'an had refrained from going for the kill here. This was a perfect opportunity, and if he were to let it slip by, the consequences could have been catastrophic. Qi Jingjun was a devout follower of the teachings of Confucianism, strictly abiding by the code of conduct and etiquette set out by Confucius himself, but he wasn't one to dogmatically follow rules. He wasn't one of those narrow-minded scholars who only knew how to preach directly from books. When it came to people of Fu Nanhua's personality and level of aptitude for cultivation, he couldn't be more familiar with their patterns of behavior. Even if he were to be intimidated by Chen Ping'an into temporarily giving up on seeking revenge, he was definitely going to see this as the most humiliating disgrace in his life. In fact, Qi Jingjun wouldn't have been surprised if this were to become an internal demon in his Dao heart. If that were to happen, then it wouldn't just be Fu Nanhua hunting down Chen Ping'an. Instead, he would have to face the wrath of the ruler of the South Sea, the entire old dragon city itself. There were some selfish elements involved in why Qi Jingjun had come to stop Chen Ping'an from killing Fu Nanhua, but mostly it was for upholding fairness. At the moment, the town was like a cracked piece of chinaware, and it was only a matter of time before it completely shattered. What Qi Jingjun had to do was delay this inevitable outcome as much as possible, doing everything in his power to arrange a way out for as many people as possible. The best outcome would be to hand Chen Ping'an over to the blacksmith, Master Wan, then hold the town together for one more cycle of 60 years, and all sides would be relatively happy. Those on the mountain peak would obtain the fated opportunities they had come here for, while those at the foot of the mountain would be able to live in safety and stability. One had to realize that in the eyes of those on the mountaintop, the lives of countless ants at the foot of the mountain were entirely expendable as long as they could further their own journey on the path to attaining the Great Tao. The heartlessness of the royal empires was nothing compared with the lengths that countless cultivators were willing to go to for the sake of their pursuit of the Great Tao. After a moment of contemplation, Qi Jingjun faded out of sight. Heaven and earth returned to normal, and the halted realm from before silently fell away. Chen Ping'an's wrist finally slammed against Fu Nanhua's neck, and the latter's head was thrown back as he was sent crashing horizontally into the wall of the alley. The tremendous impact had him reeling from dizziness, and after landing on the ground, Chen Ping'an quickly closed down the distance between them before throwing a vicious elbow into Fu Nanhua's abdomen. Fu Nanhua still hadn't regained his footing yet, and he reflexively doubled over in the wake of the elbow strike, almost throwing up the contents of his stomach in the process. Chen Ping'an had one hand around Fu Nanhua's throat, while his other hand kept his porcelain shard digging firmly into Fu Nanhua's abdomen. It was incredible to Fu Nanhua that this thin and frail-looking young boy, who was significantly shorter than himself, could have so much strength in his fingers. In particular, the sharp and ice-cold sensation of the porcelain shard digging into his abdomen was like a harbinger of death, and he knew that he was currently skirting the fine line between this realm and the afterlife. Fu Nanhua was naturally unaware of the fact that Chen Ping'an had been forced to perform all manners of grueling manual labor tasks for survival from a young age. Nor did he know that Chen Ping'an had only mustered up such astonishing strength from tapping into his limitless potential, which was fueled by an urge even stronger than that for survival. Back when Chen Ping'an had been rolling around in agony after eating the medicinal herb, he had only been at the age where he should have been attending school with all the other children, but even back then, It was this very same urge that had driven him to crawl back home in order to deliver that bamboo basket full of life-saving medicinal herbs. After that, everything that he did, including chopping firewood, burning charcoal, pottery molding and firing, digging and tasting dirt, there wasn't a single thing that hadn't been a test of his stamina and endurance. Outside the town, Fu Nanhua could easily crush 100, even 1,000 Chinpinganis with just the simplest of mystical abilities, but he had made a grave error in trying to corner Chinpingan in this town, one that had placed him in a dire situation. Suffering from intense humiliation and pain, he had completely lost the ability to think rationally, and a ferocious look appeared on his face as he growled, "If you kill me, you'll be sure to fall to an early grave. Even if you don't kill me, you're still going to die. Your fate is sealed, you piece of scum." Chinpingan had to raise his head slightly to look up at Fu Nanhua's deranged face, and he said, "You know that I don't want to kill you. There's no bad blood between us, I only retaliated because you wanted to hurt me." A sinister grin appeared on Fu Nanhua's face as he retorted, "What right does a piece of scum like you have to reason with me? What gives you the courage to be so insolent?" Chinpingan was silent for a moment before asking, "You're not going to let me live no matter what, right?" As Fu Nanhua looked into Chinpingan's eyes, he quickly calmed down. His face was quickly turning red from strangulation, then rapidly transitioned to blue, then purple. Chinpingan hadn't actually tightened his grip any further, but this was already enough to strangle a grown man like Fu Nanhua to death. "Would you believe me if I told you that I won't kill you?" Fu Nanhua asked, speaking with great difficulty. At the time, he tried to struggle free from Chinpingan's vice-like grip, but almost at the exact same moment, Chinpingan tightened his grip, and Fu Nanhua immediately gave up on his futile efforts. Chinpingan shook his head. Fu Nanhua could feel his own consciousness slipping away, and he wanted nothing more than to smash Chinpingan's head open like a watermelon, but he still did his best to remain as amicable as possible as he proposed. "What if I swear a vow to the heavens? For people like me, such vows cannot be broken without dire consequences." Here, Fu Nanhua was attempting to play a trick on Chinpingan. While it was true that vows sworn by cultivators were extremely binding, Fu Nanhua had only told Chinpingan a half-truth here. Even if he were to swear a vow, he would only do so as a surface-level declaration without actually taking it to heart. Hence, such a vow was completely non-binding, and he could easily break it without any consequences. Furthermore, even a cardinal vow sworn by a cultivator wasn't completely unbreakable. It was just a matter of whether one would be willing to pay the price for breaking the vow. In general, the price for breaking a cardinal vow had a direct correlation with the magnitude of a cultivator's cultivation base and the contents of their vow. To his surprise, Chinpingan shook his head once again. Breathing was becoming more and more difficult for Fu Nanhua, and he was becoming so dizzy that he had lost the ability to speak and negotiate further. "Am I about to die? Am I going to be killed by this piece of scum? Just like that idiot, Kai Jinjian? Once word of this gets back to Old Dragon City, will I become the laughingstock of the entire city? Will that be my legacy?" He didn't even have the chance to activate the hidden mechanism on his jade belt. As it turned out, the white jade belt around his waist was actually formed by the remnants of an earth dragon soul. That's enough. All of a sudden, a voice rang out nearby, and this was undoubtedly music to Fu Nanhua's ears, but he just so happened to fall unconscious at this exact moment, so he couldn't be sure whether that had just been a figment of his imagination. Chinpingan turned around with a surprised expression to find an ethereal Mr. Qi, whose entire body was giving off a white glow. Qi Jingjun was watching Chinpingan in silence with a faint smile on his face, but Chinpingan's expression remained determined and resolute, and he didn't loosen his grip in the slightest. Qi Jingjun wasn't furious at the fact that his well-intended intervention was being ignored, nor was he pleased by Chinpingan's determination and mental fortitude. Instead, he merely waved a sleeve at Chinpingan as if he were scooping something from the boy's body into his hand. He then spread open his hand to see what he had taken, upon which an amused look appeared on his face. It was a ball of filth that was as black as ink. As it turned out, someone had planted an inclination on his body, but it was already completely devoid of luster, indicating that it had perished long ago. He then turned to Qin Ping'an with a rather forlorn expression as he sighed. No wonder my teacher told me that for those who go on to do great things, an unshakable will is far more important than exceptional aptitude. You've taught me another valuable lesson in my teacher's stead, Qin Ping'an. Unfortunately, I am no longer in a position to be taking any more disciples. After saying this, the scholar chuckled at himself in a mocking manner. Right now, were Qi Jingquan's disciples worth anything? This was a room full of elementary children. Each student only needed to pay a measly 300 coins, and those who came from poorer families only needed to pay 3 strings of cured meat. Qi Jingquan looked at the young boy who was unwavering in his views and unwilling to loosen his grip. Deep down, you don't actually want to kill him. The issue, however, is that it looks like this person is determined to kill you no matter what. Thus, killing him will be the easiest solution, and you'll also be able to ensure your safety, at least temporarily. You want to deal with future problems as they come up? Or are you hoping to make concessions to avoid trouble, reducing a major problem to a minor one and a minor one to nothing at all? Am I correct? The young boy who often listened to his neighbor reciting books and poems immediately replied, Mr. Qi, can you please enlighten me? Qi Jingquan smiled and said, Qin Ping'an, why don't you try loosening your right hand first? Then you can decide whether you want to take a stroll around with me. Some things I can't escape blame from, so I must give you an explanation. Qin Ping'an hesitated for a brief moment before releasing his grip. He suddenly realized that Fu Nanhua had become motionless, with his eyes, hair, and even breathing all frozen. After Qi Jingquan activated the formation, the small town returned to a frozen state. Qi Jingquan said in a soft voice, "Follow me closely and try to stay within 10 steps of me." The middle-aged scholar's robes fluttered as he gracefully walked toward the end of the alley. Qin Ping'an followed closely behind him, glancing down at the palm of his left hand as he did so. His flesh was mangled and bloody, and even his bones could be seen. However, the clearly visible blood somehow refused to keep flowing. Walking in front of the young boy, Qi Jingquan smiled faintly and asked, Qin Ping'an, do you believe in the existence of immortals, spirits, demons, and ghosts? Qin Ping'an nodded and replied, I do. When I was little, my mother would often tell me some old stories. She wanted me to believe that good deeds would be rewarded, while bad deeds would be punished. My mother repeated this phrase the most, so I remember it extremely clearly. There were also stories about a water ghost in the creek that would drag away children, and stories about the underworld king who would try cases at night near the rundown ancestral hall in the town's north. Mother also said that the door gods plastered on the doors would actually come to life at night, helping us to protect the house. In the past, I didn't really believe these things. Now, however, I feel like most of it is true. Qi Jingquan softly said, some of the things she told you are true, and some of them false. As for good deeds being rewarded and bad deeds being punished, this is truly difficult to say. After all, everyone has a different definition of what's good and what's bad. The common people, kings and officials and immortals, all have different views on this. Thus, the conclusions that they reach will naturally be very different as well. Qin Ping'an hid away the shard of porcelain as he quickened his pace, walking side by side with the scholar. He raised his head and asked, Mr. Qi, can I ask you a question? As if reading the young boy's thoughts, Qi Jingquan calmly explained, this small town is the burial place of the last true dragon in the world. Countless flood dragons and their kin all believe that this place has the most prosperous opportunities and is destined to birth a dragon someday. In reality, no such thing has happened in the past 3,000 years. Instead, the children who are born in this small town all possess aptitudes, dispositions, and opportunities that are indeed far greater than those in the outside world. Even the children of the most renowned cultivators in the Eastern Treasured Bile continent aren't any superior. Of course, not every child in this small town possessed such astonishing aptitude. Qi Jingquan smiled and didn't delve into this topic anymore. He was most likely afraid of hurting the young boy's feelings. He changed the topic, saying, almost all of the cultivators who participated in that dragon-slaying calamity were severely wounded. Many of them thus decided to settle here, building houses and cultivating. There were those who unflinchingly battled to their last breath, while there were also Dao partners who survived in strokes of great fortune. There were also those whose fates intertwined after battling against that dragon side by side. After 300 years of labor and inhabitants, we have this small town that exists now. On the map of the Greatly Empire, this land was initially referred to as Great Marsh Village. Afterward, a sage personally picked up a brush and renamed this place Dragon Denver. Later again, in order to avoid the taboo of having the same character as in the name of the Greatly Empire's emperor, this place was renamed. The young boy finally couldn't hold in his words anymore, softly interrupting Qi Jink. Hun's explanation. He clasped his hands in respect and asked with an eager and yearning expression, "Mr. Qi, I actually wanted to ask you about my parents. What kind of people were they?" Qi Jingjun fell deep into thought. "Since that traveling Taoist has already revealed some secrets to you, I can also take advantage of the opening that he's made and tell you some things. From what I remember, your father was an honest and gentle person. His talent was mediocre, so he wasn't chosen to be brought out of this small town. As a result, he naturally became worthless in the eyes of those who had invested in him and was viewed as a financial loss. Perhaps they were angered, or perhaps they were faced with some predicament. In any case, the porcelain buyers tampered with your father's bonded porcelain. After that, not only did he face many setbacks in life, but he even caused your mother and you to live in misery as well. Due to some unknown reason, your father later inadvertently discovered the secrets of the bonded porcelain. He discovered that once someone was led outside the small town, they would become a puppet on a string forever. Thus, he secretly smashed the bonded porcelain that belonged to you. If I remember correctly, it was a porcelain paperweight." Qi Jingjun continued in a solemn voice, "You have to realize that all of the children born in this small town have a code name that's recorded in a secret document. There are also specific people in this small town who will extract a drop of their heart's blood through a special secret technique and place this drop of blood in the bonded porcelain that they produce at a later date. The bonded porcelains of females need to be fired for 6 years, while the bonded porcelains of males need to be fired for even longer. The kiln fire has to burn for 9 years, and it can't be stopped for a single day. The talent and aptitude of these children is also just like the quality of the porcelain pieces. Everything is decided by fate and fortune. However, those who bet on porcelain have to pay a huge sum. Even though your talent is only mediocre, your father's resolute decision to smash that porcelain paperweight enraged the porcelain buyers outside the small town. As for your mother, she was a refined and gentle woman." Qi Jingjun suddenly smiled as he continued, "When your mother got married to your father, a lot of people around their age were extremely gloomy. Although to be honest with you, you're truly putting me in a tough spot if you want me to tell you the details of your parents' lives. After arriving here, I've had many other things to do apart from teaching." Qin Pingan replied with a soft He then silently turned around and used his hands to wipe his cheeks. However, he had most likely forgotten about the miserable state of his left hand, so his face was left with streaks of blood. Even so, he was genuinely reluctant to clean his face with his sleeves. The two of them passed the archway with 12 stone pillars. Qi Jingjun didn't look at the young boy as he truthfully recounted the events of the past. When the true dragon was slain here, the 4 sages personally showed up to form a contract. They would guard this place in rotations of 60 years each, and they would observe the remnant aura of that true dragon. In fact, people dispute whether the dragon was truly killed or not. However, revealing too many of these secrets to you will only bring you calamity. Roughly speaking, this land is ruled by 4 main forces: Confucianists, Buddhists, Taoists, and martial artists. The other forces of the Eastern treasured vile continent, the various schools of thought, the myriad blessed lands, the numerous immortal sects, and the countless great clans, all have a certain amount of power and opportunity to obtain some benefits from this small town. It may sound funny, but whether or not one has purchased a bonded porcelain within the past 100 years has almost become synonymous with whether a sect or a clan is a first-rate power. I don't really understand Mr. Qi's explanations, but I've committed all of it to memory, Qin Pingan said. However, I'm already content with learning that my parents were good people. Qi Jingjun smiled and said, "Nor do I expect you to understand any of this at this moment. However, this is just some background information. Otherwise, you definitely won't listen to me if I simply persuade you not to kill Fu Nanhua. I'm not doing this because I want to protect a fellow cultivator, nor is it because I'd be saddened by his death. It more so isn't because I want Fu Nanhua or Old Dragon City to feel grateful toward me and grant me favors in the future. That is not the case. In fact, it's the complete opposite. Disciples of Confucianism advocate cultivation by engagement with society. Thus, we're most opposed to those cultivators who act with wanton disregard. The two sides have clashed openly and in secret for countless years, and if it were me from the past who had just gone to study in the Mountain Cliff Academy, how could any of them still be alive? Be it the river-severing true Lord Lu Jimao or Old Dragon City's young city Lord Fu Nanhua. I would have smashed them into oblivion long ago." Mr. Qi was still speaking in a gentle tone, and he was still walking in a graceful manner, but the young boy felt like he was a completely different person at this moment. This was similar to when old man Yao would get drunk and boast about how their Chinaware was made for the emperor, so who could compare to them? Even though Mr. Qi's tone was different when he said he would have smashed them into oblivion long ago, his expression was exactly the same as the drunk old man Yao. Qi Jingjun furrowed his brows as he looked up at the opposite end of the clay vase alley. It was as if he were listening to someone else's conversation. There was no hint of disgust on his face, but the displeasure in his eyes wasn't hidden at all. In the end, he said in a cold voice, "Make haste and leave." Qin Pingan wore a puzzled expression. Qi Jingjun explained, "It's the storyteller. His true name is Lu Jimao, and his title is the River-Severing True Lord. In fact, he's an unorthodox cultivator, and even though his cultivation is decent, his character is lowly. The conflict between you and Kai Jinjian and Fu Nanhua was mostly caused by his meddling as well. In the end, he even planted a sinister talisman in your mind. That was a script with 4 words, 'Seek death with resolve.' He secretly carved this in your mind, a truly sinister and vicious act." Qin Pingan silently committed Lu Jimao's name to memory. Qi Jingjun sighed before asking, "Aren't you curious about why I didn't interfere?" Qin Pingan shook his head in reply. Qi Jingjun answered his own question anyway, saying, "This land is like an old piece of Chinaware that has been subject to the harsh elements for 3,000 years, bringing it close to shattering. You people are ultimately outsiders, and you're also protected by that large formation. Thus, as long as your actions aren't too excessive, there's almost no way you people can cause the Chinaware to shatter. However, I'm the person holding the Chinaware. Everything I do will influence the cracks on this Chinaware. In reality, these cracks and fractures will continue to grow and emanate no matter what I do. If the Chinaware shatters, then so be it. However, what of the 5,000 or 6,000 lives in this small town? Their fate is in my hands, so how can I be so careless?" However, Mr. Qi's voice was extremely soft as he spoke these words that had weighed on his mind for many years. Qin Pingan pricked his ears up, yet he was still unable to hear it clearly. Qi Jingjun looked at the young boy who would wipe his face with his right hand from time to time. The two of them had already walked near the Apricot Blossom Alley's Iron Lock well, where there were women bending down and fetching water. Qi Jingjun asked, "Suppose a stranger falls in the well, and suppose you'll die if you try to save them. Knowing this, will you still try to save them?" Qin Pingan pondered for a moment before asking, "I want to know, is it truly possible to save that person?" Qi Jingjun didn't answer the young boy's question. Instead, he smiled and said, "Remember this, a noble person won't save them." The young boy faltered upon hearing this. "Noble person?" he asked in confusion. Qi Jingjun hesitated for a moment before squatting down and helping the young boy fix his collar. He then used his hand to help the young boy clean away the blood on his face, saying in a gentle voice, "When encountering misfortune, one must first have a heart of compassion. However, a noble person isn't equivalent to a stubborn and pedantic person. A noble person will attempt to save the unfortunate person who has fallen into the well, yet they definitely won't allow themselves to face the risk of death. It was as if this question stirred up something in the young boy's mind. He asked with a serious expression, "Mr. Qi, am I still able to live? If I can, how much longer can I live for?" Qi Jingjun carefully considered this question. He then slowly stood up and replied with resoluteness, "If you aren't afraid of the rough and bumpy road ahead of you, and if you aren't afraid of facing great hardships, you can definitely live on." A beaming smile spread across the young boy's face, and he said as a matter of fact, "I'm not afraid of hardship." Thinking of the young boy's calm and composure all this time, Qi Jingjun felt a sense of relief. "Let's go, I'll bring you to a place. Even though I can't help you with much, helping you overcome this calamity definitely won't count as breaking the rules since things have come to this. In fact, it's only right that you're compensated with a fated opportunity." The young boy seemed slightly befuddled. The two of them arrived before the old locust tree. Even though the small town was deathly silent and still, this old locust tree seemed to be an exception for some unknown reason. Its branches swayed, and its leaves fluttered. After standing still, Qi Jingjun wore a solemn expression, cupping his hands and bowing at the tree. He then raised his head and asked, "Can Qi Jingjun ask you for a locust leaf?" One to allow this young boy to leave the small town peacefully and remain safe from calamity for 3 years. The old locust tree of several thousand years didn't respond. Qi Jingjun tried again, saying, "I've guarded this place for 59 years, so I should at least be given some credit for hard work if not for merit. Can I not even ask for a single locust leaf with ancestral blessing? Not to mention, this young boy is a member of your small town. Esteemed predecessors, is there any need to be so miserly?" The old locust tree still remained silent. It was as if it were replying with a silent taunt. Qi Jingjun may have been powerful, but he was still nothing more than just another person in this land. In fact, he was more so the pitiful person who had to control the large formation of this place. Thus, even if the locust tree was unwilling to show charity and give him a locust leaf with ancestral blessings, what could he do? Qi Jingtuan's expression became dark and gloomy. In the end, he could only sigh and look down, his face filled with remorse and guilt. However, the young boy cracked a grin, and it was instead he who started to console Qi Jingjun. "Daoist Lu said that I'll have a chance to live as long as I go to the small town south and become the disciple of a blacksmith by the surname of Wan. Mr. Qi, I'm sure I'll be fine even without a locust leaf." Qi Jingjun smiled and asked, "From the bottom of your heart?" The young boy scratched his head and replied bashfully no. Qi Jingjun smiled in understanding. Suddenly, a tender and verdant green locust leaf floated down from high up in the crown of the tree. The young boy simply reached out, and the leaf automatically fell in his hand. There was a golden word on the leaf, though this disappeared in a flash. Qi Jingjun was slightly astonished. After a brief moment, he said solemnly, the word was Yao. "Qin Pingan, are you willing to repay the Yao clan's kindness, regardless of life or death? Truth be told, you might have had a sliver of a chance to live even without this leaf. I can tell you this definitively. So, you definitely have to think this through." "Is this the same Yao as Master Yao?" the young boy asked. Qi Jingjun nodded in confirmation, saying, "Indeed." The young boy put his palms together, lightly holding the locust leaf between them. He then looked up and said loudly, "As long as I'm alive, and as long as it's a member of the Yao clan related to you, I'll do just like Mr. Qi said just then. Even if they fall into a well, and even if I'll die trying to save them, I, Qin Pingan, will still definitely save them." The surroundings remained silent. Qi Jingjun smiled and said, "Let's go." As he walked away with the young boy, Qi Jingjun silently looked back at the crown of the locust tree, an expression of ridicule on his face. Locust leaves with the surname Qin did indeed exist. In fact, there were more than just a few. In the end, however, they still insisted on looking for different owners, even though they knew that this land was facing imminent destruction. They didn't care even if their chosen owner didn't share the surname Qin. Even at this moment, not a single locust leaf with ancestral blessings of the Chung clan was willing to give the young boy in straw sandals a chance. Qi Jingjun turned back around and stroked the young boy's head, teasing him by saying, "If that vow had been spoken by Song Jisun, Zhao Yao, or Gukan, perhaps they would have triggered the resonance of heaven and earth. The young boy wore a radiant smile. "That's not something I can control. I can only try my best." Qi Jingjun asked again, "From the bottom of your heart?" The young boy smiled and replied, "Yes." Somewhere along Peach Leaf Alley, there was a kindly and amiable old man sitting in a cane chair under the corridor of his residence. Beside him was a clever-looking and adorable maidservant in a jade-colored dress and long yellow-patterned pants. She slowly waved a fan as she listened to the old man telling his stories. The old man suddenly asked, "Taoya, where's the wind? Are you nodding off again? I'm not trying to frighten you, but if you slack off like this in the large clans outside the small town, you'll definitely receive punishment." There was no response. The old man, who was always lenient and kind toward his servants, was just about to tease her again when his expression suddenly changed. He looked up toward the distance, with his expression becoming solemn. As it turned out, it wasn't only the maidservant in the courtyard and her fan which had become still. Instead, even the formless wind had become still. The old man hurriedly held his breath and concentrated his attention, silently reciting a mantra and entering a state of meditation. This was to prevent his cultivation from flowing away in this temporary countercurrent in the long river of time. The old man heaved a soft sigh. Even Qi Jingjun, the person who most respected the rules and etiquette, had finally broken the rules and become involved. It was clear that a storm was brewing. Near the Iron Lock Well, a sturdily built young man from outside of town was squatting down and staring intently at the spinning spindle of the well. However, out of the corner of his eyes, he was secretly stealing glances at the side figure of a shapely village woman. She was currently bent over and hoisting a bucket of water from the well, perfectly showing off her voluptuous behind and her weighty breasts. Her curves seemed slightly exaggerated, and her shapely figure was exposed for all to see. Her movements more so highlighted her slightly unruly nature that was just like the swaying plump ear of wheat. This caused the woman, who only had a middling appearance, to radiate with a different kind of charm. When the young man finally noticed the eerie silence and stillness in the surroundings, he didn't choose to move either. Instead, he summoned his courage and stared straight at the wonderful figure of the woman at the well. The young man silently gulped. He then hurriedly shifted his body to squat in a different stance. No wonder his master had told him that women in the outside world were all tigers out of the jungle, with their power greatly reduced. However, once they were brought into the mountains and into the jungles, they would once again become powerful and domineering tigers. They would even eat people alive. When his master became drunk, he would always say that all of the heroes and talented people in the world would eventually succumb to the tiger in their own backyard. There wouldn't be a single exception. However, the young man felt like tigers out of the jungle were already extremely powerful. Take, for example, the woman before him. Her looks were clearly ordinary, yet her shapely and seductive figure caused his heart to itch. If she suddenly slapped him without a word and without reason, the young man felt like he wouldn't dare to strike back at all. In fact, if the woman then smiled at him, he might even smile back. The young man couldn't help but feel slightly disheartened and discouraged. He glanced down at his crotch and scolded, "How pathetic." As expected of something without a spine. In Clay Vase Alley, Song Jisin was currently flipping through a thick and ancient local county chronicle. He was able to discover many patterns, such as how this book was approximately appended to and edited once every 60 years. Thus, Song Jisin privately referred to this book as the 60-Year Chronicle. Something else he noticed was that those who were brought out of the small town by distant relatives at a young age would almost never return. It was as if they didn't like returning to their hometown. They were like flowers that bloomed inside the town, yet whose fragrance could only be enjoyed outside. Indeed, it was in this manner that many clans and families took root and grew in the outside world. In fact, some of them even grew into towering trees with deep and sturdy roots. Thus, Song Jisin also nicknamed this book Beyond the Wall. Right now, the young boy was on a page with someone's biography. This was a description of someone called Chao Shi's life. Few words were used to describe him, This was another distinguishing feature of the local county chronicle. Song Jisun had read this book at least 7 or 8 times, so he was naturally extremely familiar with its contents already. Thus, when he flipped through it again, like he was now, he would only choose the most bizarre and interesting stories to read. He would treat these stories as legends shared by storytellers, with their authenticity unable to be verified. Of course, Song Jisun didn't care much for this either. He only remembered the events that had occurred late that one night. When that man in his official garb was about to return to the capital to report on his work, he had come to speak with Song Jisun in an extremely solemn manner. He had told the young boy to keep one thing firmly in mind. That was, he needed to memorize every single person who had appeared in the local county chronicle. In addition to this, he needed to remember the roots of these hundreds of thousands of people and their ancestors, especially those who were related to the 4 surnames and 10 clans. Song Jisun was unmoving at this moment, much like those broken clay statues of gods in the southeast of the small town. These were statues carelessly left lying on their sides in the grass and in the dirt. No matter if they were subject to the wind or the rain, they would remain still and unmoving. At this moment, even the rays of light that were shining in from the window and sprawled across the study table were locked in an abnormal state of stillness. In this residence, there was only one person and one matter that could still move, Zhuhou and the inconspicuous 4-legged snake. She had noticed the abnormal situation very early on, and the first thought that had occurred to her was to go next door to look for that expressionless young girl and give her a hearty scolding. However, after noticing the existence of that sword, the maidservant gave up on this enticing thought. She first walked into her young master's room and shot a sideways glance at the contents of the book that he was reading. She was immediately annoyed upon seeing the words Chao Shi, so she helped her young master flip a few pages forward. Only after seeing a paragraph about Xia Shi did she smile in happiness. However, she quickly flipped the book back to its initial page in a begrudging and resentful manner. This was to prevent any heavenly secrets from being revealed and also to prevent her own secrets from being exposed. During these past years, the intelligent young master had only been suspicious of her background out of curiosity. However, he had never found any solid proof or evidence. With her grand scheme almost about to succeed, she certainly didn't want to lose everything at the final step. She often followed the young master to his private school, and there were some sayings of the scholars that she felt were extremely pretentious and disgraceful. For example, one should sacrifice their life in pursuit of righteousness. However, there were also some sayings that she found quite acceptable. For example, in a journey of 100 steps, 90 steps is only the halfway mark. This was truly a comprehensive and easily understandable principle. Meanwhile, the earthen yellow 4-legged snake was lying on the doorstep and sunbasking. With the surroundings silent and still, the 4-legged snake also recovered its true body. Under the radiant illumination of the sun, it appeared dazzling and colorful, and it appeared smooth and crystal-like. Its body was like a piece of colored glaze. In the neighboring house, Ning Yao had also entered an extremely mysterious state of fetal breathing. She didn't breathe using her mouth or nose, but was instead breathing like an infant still in their mother's womb. Her divine breath returned to its roots, while her thoughts were also paused. Inside the snow-white scabbard, the flying sword felt as if it had been granted freedom. After slowly leaving its scabbard, it gracefully flew around its owner in a light and loving manner, appearing as gentle and caring as could be. At the same time, its movements were also as beautiful as the soft fluttering of a young girl's dress. The sword wasn't flying around in a random manner, and it was instead flying around as if it were a magical horn painting a powerful symbol. It was creating the most optimal atmosphere and feng shui for its owner to recuperate in. Sure enough, the surrounding essence suddenly rushed into the young girl who wasn't breathing at this moment. Like a whale swallowing water, she voraciously feasted on the origin spiritual energy of this heaven and earth. It was also at this moment that the small town's deathly silence and stillness became a stark juxtaposition to the lively nature of this residence. On some creekside to the south of the small town, there stood a short man with thick brows and large eyes. His intense aura was imposing, and his upper body was exposed as he swung the blacksmith hammer in his hand. As the hammer landed, sparks flew into the surroundings, illuminating the entire room. Countless bright and flashing sparks chaotically shot around the spacious room, appearing dazzling and spectacular. Each blow from his hammer would unleash a different spectacle. Opposite the man was a young girl who had a clean and tidy ponytail. She was small and petite, and she was currently wearing an apron made from cowhide to prevent the sparks from striking her body. Under that, she was wearing ordinary cotton clothes. These were clothes that would be easily burned by the sparks. When the hammer fell again, tens of millions of sparks abruptly froze in midair, lingering all over the room. The young girl with a ponytail frowned and asked, "Dad." The man replied in a serious tone, "Let's swap and have you forge the sword instead. We can take advantage of this opportunity to temper your mind and heart." The young girl placed down the old sword billet before sweeping away the sparks before her. The sparks were easily swept aside, and the movement of a few instantly triggered the movement of them all. The sparks that should have been frozen in time started to chaotically clash and glow, with their innumerable collisions causing the brightness in the room to fluctuate without any pattern. Compared to the elderly seniors in the small town that were like dragons hiding in a deep pool, with their breathing paused and their attention focused, the young girl's movements truly appeared overly wild and domineering. This was especially the case after she started to swing the hammer. Her movements were large and powerful, and her strikes were more so quick and ferocious. In fact, she appeared even wilder and more unrestrained than the experienced man. Sparks would spray into the surroundings with each hammer strike, yet none of them would vanish thanks to the still and unmoving time. Strike after strike, the room was eventually filled with dense layers of sparks that were as glistening as the myriad stars in the night sky. The swordsmithing room was filled with countless radiant sparks. The man stared intently at the glowing red sword billet as he instructed in a deep voice, "Silently recite the dragon-shaking chapter of the swordsmithing scripture in your mind." The young girl's intensity suddenly dropped by a drastic amount, and she silently called, "Dad." "What?" the man asked in annoyance. The young girl's intensity fell even further as she said timidly, "I ate too little for lunch. I'm a bit hungry now, so I don't have the energy to swing the hammer anymore." The man became even angrier. If they weren't forging a sword, he would have almost started to scold her. "I'm only telling you to recite a scripture, yet you're acting as if I'm asking for your life. What kind of excuse is this? Bloody hell. My darling daughter, with your appetite, being hungry is indeed very normal." This really wasn't an excuse. The young girl secretly laughed. Even though she said she was hungry, her swinging never in fact weakened. At this moment, the girl suddenly roared, slamming the hammer down with her full strength. At the same time, she shouted, "Come out." An especially large number of sparks shot into the air this time, with their radiance also being especially blinding. The man maintained his composed expression, but he said in his mind, "Success." In the courtyard of Gukan's house, the woman slowly regained consciousness, though her head still hurt like it was about to split apart. She sat back on the bench with the help of her child. The river-severing true Lord Lujima was still resting with his eyes closed, but his thumb and index finger were slowly moving under his sleeves as if he were calculating something. The woman grabbed her son to sit down next to her before asking quietly, "Immortal Elder, what's going on?" The old man didn't open his eyes as he replied, "You have a good son, and I found myself a good disciple. Mrs. Gu, you can patiently wait to gain honor and renown thanks to your son." The woman was delighted, so much so that tears of joy brimmed in her eyes as she embraced her child, murmuring, "My child's dad. Did you hear that? Our Gukan will definitely achieve great things." A surprised expression suddenly appeared on Lujimao's face, and he opened his eyes to look down at the patterns on his palm. It was as if a new road had appeared, and he said to himself, "Why is this? It shouldn't be." The young boy didn't die, and it was instead that immortal disciple who mysteriously died. The old man couldn't help but stand up and slowly pace around the courtyard. His fingers moved extremely quickly as he calculated something, and he eventually exclaimed, "Trash." You actually died at the hands of a poor young boy? The reputation that Dawn Cloud Mountain has worked so hard to build for the past 1,000 years has been destroyed just like that. Gukan's mother was extremely uneasy and nervous as she asked, "Immortal Elder, since Canner has already become your disciple, why don't we let Chinping in off the hook?" Such foolish benevolence. If you were truly kind-hearted, you wouldn't have developed that killing intent when we first met. Yet, you're pretending to be a benevolent saint now? How shameless. Upon hearing the old man scolding, the woman became as pale as a sheet, not daring to utter a single word. However, the old man still felt angry, so he pointed at the woman and scolded, "Short-sighted village woman. When Gukan returns to Lake Shujian with me, the two of you definitely can't see each other too often, lest his cultivation be affected by you. Do you have any complaints?" The woman hurriedly waved her hands, saying, "I wouldn't dare." There was a cold and menacing glint in the old man's eyes. The woman faltered for a brief moment before quickly coming to her senses. She wore a dejected expression as she pitifully added, "I don't have any complaints. I definitely don't have any complaints." The old man forcefully flicked his sleeve, saying with a humph, "How infuriating." Seeing that the woman was still relatively charming, he had initially wanted to take her in as a personal maidservant. However, just as he had developed this thought, she had immediately acted in such a vulgar and intolerable manner. She truly deserved to lose the opportunity to set foot on the path of cultivation. At this moment, the old man suddenly tensed as if he were facing a powerful enemy. He looked around, and sure enough, this land had been drawn into a halted realm by someone. Halted realms were one of the many mystical realms in this world, and this was a realm that even terrestrial gods and golden arhats couldn't dream of creating. This was a grand mystical power of the loftiest heights. Even though this was largely thanks to that large formation, it was still something that elicited a deep sense of respect and fear. Just think about it. Regardless of whether one was an immortal, Buddha, deity, demon, or ghost, they would be forced to kowtow toward that person as long as they were trapped in this realm. Just what kind of experience was this? The river-severing true lord Lu Jimao dreamed of reaching such paramount heights. Not using one's most powerful trump card? Get absolutely fucked. If Lu Jimao possessed such a mystical realm, he would immediately drag the third-generation disciples of Buddha, the Tao Patriarch, and the Confucian hierarch inside. He didn't dare to say that he could force them to bow their heads, but they could all at the very least be on an equal standing. Without any warning at all, Lu Jimao suddenly spat a mouthful of blood. At the same time, blood also shot from his hand. It was as if someone had slashed his hand with a sharp blade. His white bowl also involuntarily appeared in his other hand, with disorderly ripples bouncing across the surface of the water and black lines chaotically colliding against the sides of the bowl. The old man didn't hesitate for a second as he clasped the palm of one hand against the back of the other. Even though he was a Taoist of an unorthodox sect, he bowed in the manner of a Confucian disciple at this moment. He bowed as deeply as he could, with his voice quivering as he said in the most sincere manner, "Lu Jimao, the island master of Lake Shujian's Cyan Gorge Island, earnestly asks Mr. Qi to have mercy on this junior's pursuit of Tao. If I've offended Mr. Qi, Sage Qi, please don't hold a grudge against this lowly person." After a long while, he finally received a reply, "Make haste and leave." These 4 words were like thunder as they exploded in the true lord's ears. Lu Jimao was overjoyed as he said, "Rest assured, Mr. Qi, I'll immediately leave this town with Gukan and his mother." The old man, who was referring to himself as a junior, suddenly remembered something, and he carefully asked, "Dare I ask, Mr. Qi, how should this junior deal with the 2 bags of gold essence copper coins?" The mighty voice sounded once again, saying, "One person and 1 item makes exactly 2 fated opportunities. Just leave them in the courtyard. For the next 30 years, you're also prohibited from taking a single step outside Lake Shujian." Lu Jimao felt as if a huge weight had been taken off his shoulder. Thus, he didn't try to act obsequiously and perform a Confucian bow this time, instead performing a dignified Taoist bow. "I wouldn't dare to refuse Senior's bestowal." This junior will definitely remember Mr. Qi's benevolence for as long as I live. Qi Jingquan's voice didn't sound again. The halted realm also vanished soon after. Lu Jimao didn't speak another word of nonsense, immediately ordering the woman and Gukan to leave the small town with him. The woman was just about to speak, yet she immediately swallowed her words in fear upon seeing Lu Jimao's viciously ferocious glare. Lu Jimao retrieved 2 bags of coins. Even though this person who was intent on becoming a genuine true lord was extremely reluctant, he still placed the 2 bags of coins on the long bench without any hesitation at all. However, just as they were about to leave, Lu Jimao suddenly asked, "Do you still have any other antiques in your house?" The woman wore a blank expression, yet the mischievous Gukan immediately reminded her, "Didn't Dad leave a myriad treasure pagoda? The one collecting dust under the bed?" Lu Jimao's eyes lit up, and he immediately ordered the woman to lead him over to investigate. Since the sage approved of the fact that Gukan himself was a fated opportunity, this also implied that the child could bring away the fated opportunities that belonged to him. As for the eventual owner of these fated opportunities, if one were in the small town, one would most likely have to listen to Qi Jingquan, even if the heavens came over. Once he returned to Lake Shujian, however, it would be a completely different story. With the 2 people entering the house, there was finally no one to look after Gukan grabbing a bag of coins in each hand. He quietly opened the door before sprinting down to the other end of the clay vase alley. Inside the house, the woman was kneeling on the floor and dragging the box out from under the bed. The box wasn't large, yet it was extremely heavy. Thus, it was hard work to pull out, and the woman couldn't help but pant in exertion. Yet, it was also at this moment that her shapely behind was kicked by the river-severing true lord. The old man jeered, "Mrs. Gu, what you're lacking is some nurturing and care. However, with just this alone, it might be a bit difficult for you to become a second-tier maidservant on the Cyan Gorge Island. However, it's more than enough for you to become a third-tier maidservant. You're a bit beneath me, but there are indeed a few guests and cultivators on the island, and you might just suit their tastes. At that time, you can put in some effort and fight for some opportunities. Don't be shy and let your good fortune slip away." The woman's body involuntarily became a bit stiff. However, more than half of her body was still under the bed, hiding her expression. After arriving at Somali, Qi Jingquan said to Chen Ping'an, "Leave Kai Jinjian and Fu Nanhua to me to deal with. Now that you have this locust leaf with ancestral blessings, you more so can't show disregard for your own safety and life. This is the best way to repay your parents' love. As for Dawn Cloud Mountain, Old Dragon City, and the river-severing True Lord, I don't dare to guarantee that they'll never seek you out to cause trouble. However, they definitely won't cause you any trouble in the next 10 years. If you're lucky, you might remain a commoner forever, and you might be able to enjoy 30 years of peace." Qi Jingquan smiled and continued, "There's no need to fear this small town either. In the future, after a while, there most likely won't be so much scheming and plotting anymore. If you want to live in peace for 20 or 30 years, why not consider getting married with a young lady here and starting a family? If you want to travel beyond this small town to witness the true scenery of the outside world, that would also be a very good choice. Reading 10,000 scrolls and walking 10,000 li is something that we scholars must do. In the future, you'll discover that in this small town, walking and traveling around is easy to do, while trying to read and study is difficult. In the outside world, however, many people find buying books, reading books, and collecting books is extremely easy. Yet, they truly detest traveling walking distances. They find it too tiring and difficult. Their so-called journeys with books on their back are nothing more than excursions in a comfortable carriage. The young boy was astonished. "Mr. Qi, walking can be considered tiring and difficult?" Qi Jingquan laughed heartily upon hearing this. "To say nothing of the outside world, let's just have a look at your surroundings first. Have you seen children of your age from Fortune Street and Peach Leaf Alley running around the mountains?" The young boy nodded in understanding. That's indeed the case. Qi Jingquan pondered for a moment before pulling out a green jade hairpin from his bun. He bent down and handed it to the poor young boy, saying, "Just treat this as a farewell gift. It isn't anything valuable, and it more so isn't an immortal treasure. So don't worry and accept it. In fact, I'm just like you. I used to be a poor village youth, yet I made a determined effort to study. After experiencing many hardships and challenges, and of course many kinds of opportunities as well, I was finally able to enter the Mountain Cliff Academy. Those days of becoming my teacher's disciple and studying were the happiest days of my life. After my teacher left the mountain, he handed this hairpin to me. This was something of an expectation and entrustment toward me. However, looking back after all these years, it's a pity that I've been unable to perform well this entire time. If my teacher were still alive, I'm sure that he would definitely be disappointed. Qin Ping'an didn't dare to accept this present. This jade hairpin seemingly represented the amiable master and disciple relationship between Mr. Qi and his teacher. Not only was this jade hairpin a representation of their deep relationship, it more so wasn't a small present either. Regardless of how unknowledgeable the young boy was, he was still at the very least someone who had fired imperial Chinaware. Thus, he was still able to appraise whether an item was valuable or not. Qi Jingjun said in a gentle voice, "If it's left with me, the final relic of my respected master will also be neglected and stifled. Thus, I'm better off giving it to you. Moreover, it's not as if you haven't earned this." I've stayed in this small town for almost 60 years, and there had always been a knot in my heart that I couldn't resolve. However, it's a shame that my respected master has already passed away, so I initially thought that I would never receive an answer to this question. In the end, it was you who unknowingly cleared up my confusion. Thus, it's only right that I give this jade hairpin to you. Qin Ping'an, I was only able to help you obtain a single locust leaf. There's nothing more I can do for you. Qin Ping'an accepted the jade hairpin with both hands. This was a jade hairpin made out of relatively ordinary material. He then looked up and said with sincerity, "Mr. Qi has already done a lot for me." Qi Jingjun simply replied with a smile. Seeing Qin Ping'an accept his jade hairpin, he also managed to do away with one more worry. This jade hairpin was indeed very ordinary. In the end, however, it was still something that had been left by his respected teacher. Thus, it was truly a wonderful thing that he was able to gift it to this young boy who definitely wouldn't bring shame to the words inscribed upon it. Qi Jingjun gave the young boy one final piece of advice, saying, "Qin Ping'an, remember this. Regardless of what you encounter in the future, you definitely can't lose hope in this world." Li is a Chinese unit of measurement equivalent to about 0.5 km. Outside a house in Clayvase Alley, there was an unruly child with 2 lines of snot trailing from his nose. He was viciously kicking the door at this moment, cursing as he did so. Saliva flew everywhere as he shouted, "Qin Ping'an, if you don't get the hell over here, I'm going to get someone to hack you to death and smash all of that worthless crap lying around in your house." What are you so busy with? Perhaps you're with Song Jisun's wife? You're doing the deed with her in broad daylight? Don't you know to look after Song Jisun's feelings? Very well. You're not going to come out, huh? Is that how it's going to be? Then I'm going to leave. I'm genuinely going to leave. Don't even think about seeing me ever again. I initially wanted to leave my treasures to you, but... Qin Ping'an, hurry up and answer the door. For some reason, the little boy's voice eventually started to carry a hint of a sob. He sniffed loudly, causing the 2 lines of snot to shoot back into his nose. Gukun suddenly felt a dull pain on the back of his head. He hurriedly turned around, and after seeing that familiar face, he let loose again, shouting, "Qin Ping'an, you bloody little thing." Judging from Qin Ping'an's expression, it was clear that he wasn't feeling too well. Gukun hurriedly changed his tune upon seeing this, asking, "Are you feeling all right?" His sudden change in tone was as smooth as hovering clouds and flowing water. It didn't appear jarring at all. Qin Ping'an was already used to this naughty little child's rude and mischievous behavior. Standing there with a new clay pot in his hands, Qin Ping'an huffed, "Can you not tell whether I'm feeling all right or not?" Realizing that he still had important matters to deal with, Gukun hurriedly dragged Qin Ping'an to the entrance of his courtyard. He then stuffed 2 exquisitely decorated pouches into Qin Ping'an's hands, lowering his voice and saying, "Remember the small loach you gave me last year?" Qin Ping'an was slightly baffled as he held the 2 weighty pouches. He was quite familiar with these pouches, as the brocade-robed boy had especially given a pouch of copper coins to him after forcefully buying that golden carp. Qin Ping'an looked around, and he saw that there was no one else on Clay Vase Alley. However, he still opened his door in a hurry, bringing Gukan into the courtyard. After putting the clay pot down, he directly asked, "An outsider wants to buy that catfish from you? Is that correct, Gukan? I strongly suggest you not to sell it. Don't sell it even if they try to force you. Didn't you want to give your mother a good life in the future? If so, then you definitely have to keep that loach, understand?" Gukan suddenly burst into tears. He grabbed onto Qin Ping'an's sleeves and said through sobs, "I wanted to return the loach to you, but mother didn't let me. She even smacked my face. Ever since I was young, my mother has never hit me before. And that storyteller, I don't know if he's a god or a ghost, but he's extremely terrifying. He brought me into his white bowl, and after that, the loach suddenly became extremely big. In fact, it became even bigger than the water vat in my house." Qin Ping'an held his hand over the little boy's mouth, his expression extremely serious as he shot a glare and said, "Since I gave the loach to you, the loach is now yours. Do you still want to give your mother a good life in the future? Do you want her to be able to eat meat every day? And use makeup and be able to buy those smooth and silky clothes?" Gukan sniffed before earnestly nodding in response. Qin Ping'an removed his hand, squatting down and asking, "What's with these 2 pouches of coins? Did you secretly bring them over?" Gukan's eyes darted around, and he was just about to make up a story. However, Qin Ping'an was far too familiar with him, so much so that he could immediately see through his thoughts. He directly rewarded Gukan with a rap on the head before saying sternly, "Take them back." Gukan's stubbornness also showed itself at this moment, and he retorted, "No." An angry expression spread across Qin Ping'an's face. He raised his hand and was just about to give Gukan a true smack on the head. However, seeing his extremely stubborn expression, Qin Ping'an couldn't help but feel soft-hearted. He pondered for a moment before softening his voice and asking, "What's going on? Tell me what's happening." Gukan recounted the events to him from beginning to end. While this little child was truly infuriating most of the time, one had to admit that he was indeed very smart and intelligent for his young age. From the old locust tree to the Iron Lock Well, and from the Iron Lock Well to Clay Vase Alley, the little boy clearly described his encounter with the storyteller and how the storyteller had wanted to take him as a disciple. After hearing this, Qin Ping'an felt like he largely understood the situation. Gukan was most likely someone who had obtained locust leaves with ancestral blessings. Regardless of whether this was because of fortune rising from the graves of his ancestors or because of the fated opportunities and fortunes that Mr. Qi and Taoist Lu spoke of, it was very likely the case that Gukan would be brought out of the small town by that storyteller. However, Qin Ping'an immediately felt anxious and uneasy upon thinking of the river severing True Lord. According to Mr. Qi, this person was extremely immoral, and he had more so tried to lead him to his death. He hadn't hesitated to use immortal techniques to create conflict between him and Kai Jinjian. Was it truly a good thing for Gukan to become his disciple? On the other hand, however, since this person was willing to take Gukan as a disciple, and since he didn't try to kidnap or trick him, nor forcefully buy him, could it be presumed that Gukan wouldn't face any life-threatening dangers? The eyes of the mischievous little boy darted around. Seizing the opportunity while Qin Ping'an was still thinking, he suddenly grabbed the 2 pouches of coins from his hands without warning. He then tossed them toward the house before turning around to run away. However, Qin Ping'an's hand shot out and grabbed onto his collar, immediately bringing him to a halt and dragging him back. Gukan wrapped his arms around his head, appearing as pitiful as could be. Even though Qin Ping'an had dragged the little boy back, he was still hesitant about how to deal with the situation. This was a matter with great consequence, so Qin Ping'an was extremely afraid of making an incorrect decision and ultimately bringing harm to Gukan and his mother. If this matter had only involved himself, the young boy with no one to depend on would have most likely been much more decisive and resolute. The young woman in black had already gotten off the bed at some time, and after arriving at the doorstep, she said, "My mother once said that each person has their own fate." Just looking at him, it's clear that this child is a scourge who's destined to wreak havoc for 1,000 years. He's the type of person who'll be struck with dumb luck after dumb luck. Gukan's eyes lit up at this moment, and he hurriedly wiped the 2 lines of snot from his face. He cracked an obsequious smile, revealing his missing baby teeth as he said, "Sister, you're so pretty. You look just like my second sister. This place is too cramped, so why don't you come to my house to chat?" Chen Ping'an said in exasperation, "When did your mother get remarried to your father?" The little boy immediately rolled his eyes after being exposed. He quickly changed his expression and tone, clicking his tongue in wonder and saying, "Chen Ping'an, how impressive. You're finally starting to show some promise. When did you trick a lady back home? Are you going to get married and have guests play pranks on you? However, it's a shame that I won't be able to attend. Otherwise, I would definitely squat in the corner and listen to you two wrestling in bed." Chen Ping'an pressed his hand down on Gukan's head. He then turned to the woman in black and said apologetically, "This is just what he's like. Don't be angry." The young woman glanced at the little boy and said, "Little brat." Gukan was just about to unleash his immense talent, yet he suddenly felt the hand on his head pressing down even harder. He immediately wilted under the pressure, saying in a listless manner, "Sister, you're so beautiful." "Of course, everything you say is correct." The young woman in black didn't pay any heed to the little boy. Instead, she turned around to face Chen Ping'an, saying in a meaningful voice, "It's best that you accept those 2 pouches of copper coins, lest they become the reason for a falling out in the future. Moreover, once this little boy achieves some success in cultivation in the future, it's extremely likely that his Dao heart will be unstable if you cause him to feel lingering regret and guilt today. That will expose his heart to the claws of demons." These were the words that Gukan wanted to hear. He raised a thumb at the young woman and said, "Your hair is long, and you're also long of wit and knowledge. Ref, a play on the derogatory saying that women have long hair, but are short of wit and knowledge. Ref. Sure enough, you're more reasonable than that young lady from next door." The young woman in black raised an eyebrow, yet she surprisingly accepted this compliment with pleasure. At this moment, an extremely worried yet furious voice roared, "Gukan." The little boy became slightly pale, and he said, all right, I'm going to leave now, Chen Ping'an. I'm going to leave, okay?" Even though the little boy said this, he didn't realize that he was gripping Chen Ping'an's sleeve even tighter. Perhaps in Gukan's subconsciousness, he had already accepted Chen Ping'an as his only close companion apart from his mother since long ago. Chen Ping'an led the little boy out of his courtyard. He squatted down and said in a quiet voice, "Gukan, remember to be careful of your master. Also, make sure to look after your mother. You're a responsible man, and your mother can only rely on you in the future. Don't make her worry all the time." Gukan responded with a nod. Chen Ping'an continued, "Once you arrive outside, remember to do more and speak less. Control your tongue, and so be it if you have to suffer a little because of it. Don't try to always seek an advantage with your tongue. Unlike us, the people outside are far more likely to bear grudges." The little boy's eyes were slightly red as he retorted, "The people here are also very good at bearing grudges. Only you're an exception." Chen Ping'an didn't know whether to laugh or to cry. However, he was indeed rendered speechless. Chen Ping'an suddenly recalled something at this moment, and he asked in a serious voice, "Gukan, did you receive a locust leaf?" If he hadn't received one, then Chen Ping'an would be more inclined to believe that Gukan hadn't obtained some fated immortal opportunity. Instead, the arrival of that storyteller was perhaps akin to the arrival of the Grim Reaper. The little boy immediately started to feel angry upon hearing this. With a whoosh, he grabbed a large handful of locust leaves from his pocket and cursed out of habit, "I don't know which cursed bastard did this. They secretly stuffed all of these crappy leaves in my pockets, and I only just discovered this when I tried to put the 2 pouches in my pockets after sneaking away from home. If it wasn't Fatty Zhao, then it must have been that little girl Lu Mei. If my mother finds all these leaves when washing my clothes, won't I be scolded and called a headache again? Those 2 are lucky that I'm about to leave soon. Otherwise, I'll certainly toss stones into their latrine in secret." The little boy was on a roll as he continued to curse in anger. Chen Ping'an was absolutely stunned. After coming to his senses, however, he immediately felt a great sense of relief. Upon seeing the little boy preparing to roughly throw the handful of leaves onto the ground, he hurriedly stepped forward to stop him. His expression was extremely serious as he said, "Gukan, take them back and take good care of them. You definitely have to take good care of them. If it's possible, it's best that you keep these locust leaves a secret from even your mother. This is very possibly for her own good." The little boy was baffled, but he still nodded and said, "Okay." Qin Pinyin exhaled a long breath, saying to himself, "I genuinely feel relieved now." Gukan suddenly fell forward, and his head heavily clashed together with Qin Pinyin's. He whimpered and said, "Sorry." Qin Pinyin tousled his hair and scolded with a smile, "Silly boy." Gukan suddenly whispered something next to his ears. Qin Pinyin immediately faltered. The little boy turned around and ran away, not forgetting to wave his hand and say, "I heard the old man say that he's going to bring mother and me to a place called Cyan Gorge Island in Lake Shujian. If you wind up in such a sorry state that you don't even have a wife, you can go there to look for me. I'm not boasting, but if it's some average woman like the neighboring Zhuhou, I'll be able to gift you a dozen of them no problem." Qin Pinyin stood still and nodded in reply. He was feeling a little sad. After all, Gukan was much like a younger brother to him. Thus, Qin Pinyin was always willing to cater to Gukan's whims. The young boy in straw sandals appeared slightly dazed as he looked at the slowly disappearing figure of the little boy. Life had always treated him like this. It was as if the people who he cared about would always leave his side no matter what he did. Standing on Clay Vase Alley, Qin Pinyin cracked a grin. The heavens were fairly stingy. The neighboring door was quietly opened, from which emerged the maidservant Ji Gue. She was slender and graceful, much like a lotus in a lake. "You heard all of Gukan's mean words?" Qin Pinyin asked. She blinked her beautiful eyes and replied, "I'll pretend that I didn't hear anything. In any case, there's no way I can win an argument against that mother and son." Qin Pinyin felt slightly awkward. In the end, he could only put in some good words for that little brat Gukan, saying, in reality, he doesn't have any bad intentions. It's just that his words are a little crude and jarring. Jigui wore an emotionless smile, saying, "I have no clue whether Gukan's intentions are good or bad. However, his widowed mother is definitely no easy person to deal with. I'm very certain of this." Qin Pinyin didn't know how to respond. Thus, he could only employ the same tactic that he had only just learned from her, pretend that he hadn't heard anything. Jigui suddenly asked a mystifying question. "Qin Pinyin, you truly don't feel any regret?" Qin Pinyin was stumped. "What?" It didn't look like he was playing dumb and acting. Jigui sighed before going back inside and shutting the wooden door. Qin Pinyin had remained standing on Clay Vase Alley this entire time, and with his extremely good eyesight, he was finally able to see the door of Gukan's house opening. 3 people walked out, with the mother wearing a large backpack and her son a small one. They slowly walked toward the other end of Clay Vase Alley. In fact, Qin Pinyin clearly saw the storyteller turning around to glance at him, a playful smile on his face. Only when the 3 figures vanished into the distance did Qin Pinyin return inside. It was also at this moment that he found that Ning Yao was already able to sit on the doorstep by herself. Was her body forged from steel? Qin Pinyin placed the jade hairpin that Mr. Qi had given him and the 2 pouches of copper coins on the table. He then started to boil water and brew medicine, his actions showing off his wealth of experience. He appeared nothing like a potter at this moment, and he instead appeared like someone who had worked in a pharmacy for many years. Ning Yao felt slightly puzzled, but she didn't open her mouth to ask. She was extremely bored right now, so she walked over to the table. After pondering for a moment, she retrieved the pouch of coins that Qin Pinyin had hidden in the vase. She sat down, and there were now 3 pouches of coins and a jade hairpin on the table before her. Of course, there was also the sword that was obediently cowering in the corner. Qin Pinyin didn't stop her from retrieving the pouch of coins. He simply warned her, "Mr. Qi gave that jade hairpin to me, so be careful with it." Perhaps afraid that the young woman wouldn't take his warning seriously, Qin Pinyin timidly warned again, "You really do have to be careful." The young woman rolled her eyes. 3 pouches of gold essence copper coins. Coincidentally, there was 1 pouch of greeting spring coins, 1 pouch of offering coins, and 1 pouch of good fortune coins. All 3 types of coins were present. The young woman rested her chin in one hand as she reached over to play around with 3 coins with her other. "How did everything go? Are you able to tell me?" she casually asked. Qin Ping'an kept a careful eye on the flames as he squatted next to the wall near the window. Occasionally, he would also flip through the 3 sheets of prescription. Upon hearing Ning Yao's question, he replied, "Is it appropriate to tell?" The young woman furrowed her brows. "You're already stuck in such a miserable state, yet you're still afraid that I might be silenced and killed after hearing your secrets? Qin Ping'an, I'm not trying to belittle or discourage you, but I encourage a foolishly kind person like you to never leave this small town. Otherwise, you won't even know how you got killed." The young woman was expressing great pity for his misfortune, yet she was also expressing deep annoyance at his lack of fight. Even if this stubborn and inflexible youth were an Arhat, heavenly lord, and sword immortal all at once, he would still face certain death within a year once he left this small town and was tossed into her hometown. Not even his corpse would remain. The young boy in straw sandals chuckled and said, "Then I'll tell you." Ning Yao placed 3 slender fingers on 3 separate copper coins, dragging them around the table. "Do whatever you want." Qin Ping'an recounted the events before Mr. Qi's arrival. As for the events after Mr. Qi's arrival, he picked and chose what he told her. After listening to his recollection, the young woman calmly said, "That river-severing true Lord Lu Jimao was clearly the culprit behind everything. However, it's not like Kai Jinjian and Fu Nanhua were good people either. If it weren't for Mr. Qi's help, you would have had no hope of escaping from the clutches of the 3 forces in the future, regardless of how far you fled. To put it bluntly, killing you is truly an easy task. If we weren't in this small town, to say nothing of Lu Jimao, even that woman from Dawn Cloud Mountain would be able to crush your body and soul with a single finger." Qin Ping'an nodded and murmured, "I know." "You don't know squat." Ning Yao huffed angrily. Qin Ping'an didn't deny this, and he continued to brew the medicine. "It's all because of that loach that you're facing this calamity. Why didn't you tell that little boy the truth?" she asked. Qin Ping'an didn't remain silent this time, nor did he turn around to look at her. He sat down on a small stool and looked at the jumping red flames as he quietly replied, "Doing that wouldn't be right." Ning Yao wanted to say something, but she hesitated for a moment before eventually looking at the back of the skinny young boy. She sighed with emotion and said, "Then do you know? If your fists aren't strong enough, no one will care whether you're right or wrong." The young boy shook his head. Regardless of whether they want to listen to it or not, the truth of the matter won't change. As if unsure of himself, he turned around and asked with a smile, "Right?" Ning Yao glared back at him. "Right in your dreams." Qin Ping'an huffed and turned back around, continuing to brew the medicine. The young woman in black, the outsider called Ning Yao, picked up the jade hairpin and carefully observed it. She quickly discovered a small line of characters inscribed upon it. She glanced at Qin Ping'an. Even though she only had a rough understanding of calligraphy, she still felt that the characters inscribed on the jade hairpin were extremely beautiful and moving. As gentle and amiable as jade should a virtuous person be, like threading a needle, brewing medicine was also a delicate task. Qin Ping'an was very calm and methodical as he focused on the pot of medicine before him. A mysterious sense of happiness radiated from his body. However, Ning Yao wasn't a patient person. Apart from practicing sword techniques and saber techniques, there weren't many other things that interested her. She had left home at a young age, traveling all over the lands by herself. As a result, she often had to live in very rough environments. However, it was also because of this that she wasn't feeling any sense of discomfort in the bare and destitute house of the young boy. After all, she was already accustomed to camping out in the open and trekking through the wind and rain. Regardless of how particular a person once was, such experiences would eventually cause them to become much less so. "Is your left hand okay now?" Ning Yao asked. Qin Ping'an's left hand was wrapped in strips of cotton cloth as he carried a bowl of medicine over. After Ning Yao accepted it, he smiled and replied, "It's fine." I ground up some herbal medicines before I came back, and I've already applied the paste to my wound. When I suffered cuts and bruises while working as a potter, I also used this paste to treat my wounds. It worked 100% of the time. In fact, an old man from the Yang family's medicine shop told me this secret recipe a long time ago. However, I promised him that I wouldn't share this secret recipe with others. Otherwise, seeing that you always travel around, it's quite likely that you might find it useful. If you want a copy, I can look for that old man and ask him for permission. However, I was in quite a hurry when I went to the medicine shop today, so I wasn't able to see the old man. Hopefully, he was only gone for a short while. As the young woman drank her medicine, her eyebrows that were as slender as blades knitted into a slight frown. However, she still finished drinking the medicine without any complaints. After returning the bowl to the waiting young boy, she mumbled, "Kind-hearted fool. No wonder you're so absurdly poor. It's almost as if you deserve to be bullied." Before Chen Ping'an could respond, Ningyao added, "Don't mind me. I'm quite frank when I speak." However, Ningyao didn't know that this explanation was even more hurtful than her initial words. Chen Ping'an wanted to say something, but he couldn't help but hesitate. Ningyao wiped away the medicine stains from the corners of her mouth before sitting up straight and saying in a serious voice, "Even though the sage who's looking over this place, the person whom you refer to as Mr. Qi from the private school, wants to help you resolve this matter and allow you to live in peace, you have to realize that everyone has a limit to their abilities. This is true even for sages. This is not to mention that Mr. Qi's situation is also quite dire at this moment, and he's showing signs of being like a clay Buddha who can barely cross a river. I'm afraid that he might not be able to ensure your safety in the future. Meanwhile, I, Ningyao, am an outsider, and I'm someone who reciprocates a drop of kindness with a spring of goodwill. If someone glares at me, however, I'll also reciprocate their hostility with ferocity and vengeance." Reciprocating a drop of kindness with a spring of goodwill, reciprocating hostility with ferocity and vengeance, a clay Buddha who can barely cross a river. Right now, Ningyao was secretly filled with a sense of pride. Just listen to her words. Weren't they filled with knowledge and culture? However, it was a pity that Chen Ping'an's neighbor was quite a well-read student. Song Jisun would recite the teachings of the sages almost every morning and every night, and according to him, this was a process of nourishing his noble spirit. Thus, even though Chen Ping'an had never read these books before, he had at the very least heard them being recited. As such, he wasn't unfamiliar with the philosophy of these students and scholars. Even when it came to deep and profound phrases, he could still roughly guess their meaning based on the context of the words that came before and after. Ningyao stared intently at Chen Ping'an, hoping to find a hint of astonishment, admiration, or confusion on his face. To her dismay, however, Chen Ping'an's expression was a punchable one that seemingly said, "I understand. Please continue." The young woman was extremely disheartened. Her high spirits and vigor receded like a tide, and she huffed, "What I'm trying to say is, since you saved my life, I'll naturally help you kill Old Dragon City's Fu-Nanhua in the future, or Lake Shujian's Lu Jimao. If you want to kill both of them to completely eliminate all future threats, however, you'll have to offer some money to do away with the misfortune. After all, the two of us are nothing more than strangers who came together by chance. In other words, you need to pay me with a pouch of copper coins." The young woman quickly pointed at the bag of greeting spring coins and said, "For example, this pouch is quite to my liking. The patterns of the offering coins and good fortune coins don't look very good, and their makes don't suit my taste either." Ningyao slightly tilted her chin and continued, "If you're willing to throw in the 2 other pouches of copper coins in addition to this, I can help you deal with Old Dragon City and Dawn Cloud Mountain as well. Of course, you can forget about all of this if I die at the hands of Lu Jimao. After all, my cultivation base is low, and I've only just reached the 6th tier of the 9 tiers of martial arts. As a martial artist, my physique is still yet to reach an accomplished state. As for the 15 tiers of cultivation, I've more so only reached the Dragon Gate tier of the middle 5 tiers. I have 6 patterns in my vital organs, but I've still yet to add the final touch to bring them to life." Chen Ping'an was truly dumbfounded this time. He had no idea what she was talking about. The young woman felt slightly ashamed and angry. She had always felt a sense of embarrassment and humiliation at her lowly cultivation base, yet Qin Pingin's dazed expression was as if he were saying, "Miss, please explain this to me." This undoubtedly jabbed her where it hurt. Upon seeing her dark expression, Qin Pingin immediately realized the gravity of the situation. He hurriedly said, "Ning Yao, your wounds were so severe just a moment ago, so why does it look like you're mostly healed already?" The young woman lowered her gaze a little as she wrapped her arms around her chest and said in a hoarse voice, "I was genuinely almost about to die at that time. If Daoist Liu hadn't saved me, I would have. Anyhow, I owe you a huge favor, so I more so shouldn't try to take advantage of you while you're in such a difficult situation. I shouldn't have asked for those 3 pouches of copper coins. How can my life be compared to the likes of Lu Jimao and the others? So, I was the one who was wrong. Pretend that I didn't say anything just then. After I leave this small town, I'll try my best to deal with those threats for you. However, let me say this first, I only do what's within my abilities, and I won't sacrifice myself if I know I definitely can't succeed." The young woman was feeling extremely downcast at this moment. Perhaps this was because she rarely ever lowered her head and apologized to others. "Which pouch of coins is the offering coins?" Qin Pingin asked. Ning Yao pointed at the pouch that was decorated with gold patterns. Qin Pingin took out 3 copper coins and held them in his hand. He then used his arm to push the 3 pouches of copper coins toward the young woman, saying with a smile, "Here, take these." Ning Yao was astounded. After a long while, she finally came to her senses and asked, "Qin Pingin, were you dropped on your head as a child?" "No," Qin Pingin replied in exasperation. "However, I was often whipped in the head by cow tails when I helped others herd cattle." Ning Yao suddenly flared up in rage, slamming the table and interrogating, "Perhaps you have feelings for me?" Qin Pingin was completely stupefied. The young woman cracked a grin, raising her thumbs at Qin Pingin and saying, "You have very good taste." She then twisted her thumb and pointed at herself, saying with a buoyant expression, "However, I obviously won't agree. The man who I like will definitely be the most powerful sword immortal in the world. The most powerful in the entire world. A great sword immortal. The Tao ancestor and Buddha? The paramount Confucius? Standing before his sword, they'll have no option but to lower their heads and stand aside." Qin Pingin was beet red at this moment. He scratched his head and said, "Ning Yao, I think you misunderstood. I never said I liked you." Ning Yao raised an eyebrow. She pondered for a moment before leaning forward and squinting an eye, raising her hand and bringing her index finger and thumb an inch apart. "Not even this much?" she asked in a diffident voice. Qin Pingin was firm and resolute as he replied, "No. Please be at ease." Ning Yao heaved a heavy sigh as she retracted her hand, saying in a sympathetic voice, "Qin Pingin, even if you're fortunate enough to find yourself a wife in the future, she'll most likely be a scatterbrained person." Qin Pingin sat down opposite to her, smiling happily as he said, "I'll be happy as long as she's a good person." Ning Yao didn't offer a comment on this. Some people meandered about and waited for death, while others would be satisfied as long as they were slightly well off. Meanwhile, there were also those who were extremely driven and would soar to unfathomable heights. Just like her mother had said, different people would have different destinies and fates. There was not necessarily a superior or inferior fate. However, her father had different views on this matter. While one should not try to forcefully obtain that which was not fated, this did not then imply that they shouldn't strive to obtain it at all. A person still needed to maintain their ambition. If they still failed to obtain that which they desired, then that would be a different conversation altogether. Of course, her father didn't dare to utter these words before her mother. "Ning Yao, have you also come to our small town to seek a fated opportunity?" Qin Pingin casually asked. The young woman didn't try to conceal anything, replying, "I was only able to obtain a position to enter this small town after exhausting all of my savings and using up a favor. However, I'm not like the others. I'm not looking for a fated opportunity or whatever, and I simply want to ask someone to forge a sword for me. It'll be best if it's a sword that resonates with my ideals. As for whether it's sharp or not, and as for whether it can carry a boundless sword chi or not, all of these are secondary. Forge a sword? Qin Ping'an asked in puzzlement. Yes, I want to ask the blacksmith master Wan to forge a sword for me. He's got quite a reputation in this small town, and he's also got an ironclad rule that he never breaks. That is, he'll only forge one sword every 30 years. In fact, he was only willing to come here to replace Qi Jingjun because he felt like the environment here was extremely suitable for forging a sword. I want to try my luck and see whether he's willing to forge a sword for me. If it truly doesn't work out, it's not like there's anything I can do about it either. I can only treat it as bad luck. Qin Ping'an smiled and said, good people will always be blessed with good karma. I genuinely don't know how to respond, Ningyao said without strength. She then glanced at the young boy and asked, your left hand doesn't hurt anymore? Qin Ping'an faltered upon hearing this. It does hurt. Then why don't you look like you're in pain? She asked in a skeptical voice. Even if I roll around and scream, my pain won't go away, will it? Qin Ping'an responded as a matter of fact. Ningyao slapped her forehead. I truly don't know how to deal with you. You're just like my dad. However, you're far, far weaker than him. Qin Ping'an replied with a smile, staying silent as he gazed at the courtyard in front of his house. Ningyao pushed the 3 bags of copper coins back toward him, saying, I don't want them. Qin Ping'an dragged his gaze back over, saying softly, Ningyao, have you considered that it might be a bad thing for me to keep them? After seeing Mr. Qi, I'm even more certain of this. Ningyao wasn't the type of person who would easily change her decision. She shook her head and said, that's something for you to worry about. It's got nothing to do with me. I've already made up my mind. I'll definitely repay you for saving my life in the future. I definitely won't repay you in a half-hearted way either. I have to live up to my name and reputation. However, you have to look after yourself in the meantime as well. Don't go dying by yourself by accident. As long as you can make it through this period. The agreeable young boy interrupted her for the first time, saying, Ningyao, it was Taoist Lu who saved you, so you don't need to feel like you owe me anything. If I hadn't thought that I was going to die at the time, and if I hadn't wanted to ask Taoist Lu to do a little something for my parents, I definitely wouldn't have opened the door. The young woman humphed and said, that's your own problem. The young boy smiled and repeated her retort. Well, that's your own problem then. They both glared at each other. It was surprisingly Ningyao who backed down first, and she said with a headache, suppose you really do like me. But I genuinely can't accept your feelings. Qin Ping'an put his head in his hands. Against such a stubborn and strange girl, he truly didn't know what to do. At this moment, someone climbed over the wall and entered the courtyard. There was no need to guess who this was. Only Lu Xianyang would do such a thing. He ran over to the door and was just about to call out, yet he suddenly swallowed his words as if he were being choked. Qin Ping'an hurriedly stood up and walked next to Lu Xianyang, whispering, can I stay over at your place for the next 2 days? This young woman is going to be staying at my house. Lu Xianyang pushed Qin Ping'an's head aside. He then rubbed his hands like a fly rubbing its legs, saying in a considerate voice, young lady, my house is bigger and it's also got more necessities. If you don't mind, why don't you stay over at my place? I do mind, the young woman said, her back facing them. Lu Xianyang grimaced upon hearing this. Looking at the slender figure and her saber, he continued to persist, saying, young lady, you might not know, but I was just being blocked by 2 people over at the covered bridge just then. They were sobbing and begging me to sell my ancestral treasures to them. Even so, I still refused. However, I was still screwed over by them, and I was almost scolded to death by Master Wan. By the looks of it, you're also an outsider who's come here to try your luck. Even though I might not necessarily sell those treasures to you, it's certainly no problem for me to show them to you and allow you to broaden your horizons. No need, Ningyao replied, her voice still cold. Lu Xianyang sat down in Qin Ping'an's original spot. His eyes lit up when he saw the young woman's appearance, and he said, young lady, why so cold? Qin Ping'an and I can squeeze ourselves into this shabby house. You can go over to my larger house, and you certainly won't feel limited in there. You won't feel like there's not even space to place your hands and feet. Ningyao's expression became stern as she replied, Thanks for the goodwill. You can go away and play by yourself now. Lu Xianyang didn't feel awkward at all. Instead, he stood up and said, I understand. Be it a golden hut or a silver hut, none of them can compare to one's own grass hut. Understood, understood. Lu Xianyang dragged Qinping into the door, elbowing him and asking, What's going on? It's hard to explain in just a few words. Just tell me, can I stay over at your place or not? Qinping replied. Lu Xianyang rolled his eyes. Of course you can. However, you have to promise me that you'll keep an eye on Ji Gui for me. You definitely can't let that brat Song Jisun forcefully defile her. You have to protect the chastity of my future wife. In your dreams, Qinping replied without hesitation. Lu Xianyang patted Qinping's shoulder and said in a meaningful voice, I'll take that as a yes. The young woman in black suddenly turned around, saying, Do you know that you have a natural aptitude for swordsmanship? The porcelain buyers most likely didn't take you out of the small town when you were 9 because they wanted you to absorb more of the spiritual energy of this place. They made the correct decision. So, when you're working with Master Wan, you definitely have to seize the opportunity to become his disciple. Remember, you have to at least become an in-house disciple, and it's best if you can become a direct disciple. As for anything greater than that, there's no need for you to dream so far. Your physique and aptitudes still haven't reached such a phenomenal level yet. Lu Xianyang smiled and nodded earnestly, agreeing with what the young woman said. He then turned around to face Qinping, pointing at Ning Yao before pointing at his own head. She's telling the truth. Don't disregard it, Qinping said. Lu Xianyang became solemn, and he said in a quiet voice, I feel like something's not quite right. Guess who was leading the 2 groups of people at the covered bridge just then? It was Lu Zhangchun, that little bastard from Fortune Street. What ill intentions is he harboring? It's not like I'm money-hungry or anything, so why should I do business with them? Moreover, that suit of armor is an ancient treasure passed down by my ancestors. If I sell it, won't I be scolded to death by my grandfather when I see him in my dreams? Qinping's expression was as if he were facing a great enemy. You have to be careful. Lu Zhengzhen and those outsiders aren't to be trifled with. He then turned around and asked Ning Yao, Do you know about their backgrounds? The young woman in black nodded, replying, The old man and the little girl are from Sun-Scorched Mountain, which can be regarded as a well-established and reputable sect in the Eastern Treasured Vile Continent. The old man isn't human, and to put it simply, he's 100 times more powerful than either Fu Nanhua or Kai Jinjian. The woman and her son aren't pushovers either. In fact, those who can enter the small town in groups of 2 are naturally more than just a little bit wealthy. The woman is extremely shrewd and calculating, and the little boy doesn't seem like a good-hearted person either. So, I encourage your friend to become Master Wan's disciple as soon as possible. That will essentially be the same as obtaining a life-saving talisman. In this small town, regardless of how powerful one's background or supporter, they wouldn't dare to provoke or challenge a sage. Are you confident that you can become Master Wan's disciple? Qinping turned to Lu Xianyang and asked. Lu Xianyang was slightly unsure, and he slowly muttered, On the first day I went to work as an apprentice, Master Wan was looking at me with the same expression that old man Yao always used to wear. He probably wanted to observe me for some time before making a decision on whether he wanted to take me as a disciple or not. It's just that. Qinping gave him a ferocious glare. Lu Xianyang wore a self-ridiculing smile as he continued, It's just that Master Wan's darling daughter has far too great of an appetite. I was absolutely astounded by her, so I made a few small jokes. Who knew that she would be so powerful and domineering when wielding a blacksmith hammer in the forge, yet so timid and shy during other times? How was I meant to know that she couldn't take a joke? I made her cry at that time, and unfortunately for me, this was all caught by her father. The way that he looked at me instantly became strange. There's no way I can become his disciple now. In any case, I never planned to become anyone's slave or disciple. Dealing with old man Yao's strange temper was already more than enough for me. Was I not just working at the blacksmith to put food on the table? Qinping looked up with a dark expression. Lu Xianyang, who was half a head taller than Qinping, lowered his head, not daring to look at the young boy in straw sandals. Ning Yao was slightly confused by the sight. This was also the first time that she had seen him become genuinely angry. Did any locust leaves mysteriously appear on you when you passed by the old locust tree? Qin Pingan asked in a low voice. Lu Xianyang shook his head, replying nope. However, the Taoist fortune teller who likes to perv on women said some ill-omened things to me. I almost smashed his stall when I heard it. Qin Pingan's expression changed slightly. He frowned before turning around and asking, Ning Yao, will 3 pouches of gold essence copper coins suffice as payment? Also, will this be too troublesome for you? Please tell me the truth. Ning Yao pondered this carefully before replying, it is quite a hassle, but it won't be too much trouble. However, you guys still have to be especially careful in these next 2 days. Tell your friend not to run around everywhere. After all, my situation isn't too good right now. She paused for a brief moment before adding, 2 bags of coins for 2 groups of people, and another bag of coins for Master Wan to take your friend as a disciple. To put it simply, I'll take a bag of coins for each task that I accomplish. Rest assured, since I've agreed to this, it means that I'm confident that I can earn at least 2 bags of coins. Qin Pingan ran inside the house, hurriedly pushing the 3 bags of coins toward the young woman. Take them. Ning Yao wasn't a hesitant person, so she didn't refuse Qin Pingan's offer this time, accepting 2 bags of copper coins. She wore a fake smile as she said, many people in the world try to stuff as much money as they can into their pockets. Yet, there are also people like you who enjoy tossing money at others. The young boy didn't rebut her. Instead, he nodded and said with a smile, money is indeed very important. Very, very important. Lu Xianyang, who had been kept in the dark this entire time, frantically exclaimed, Qin Pingan, have you gone mad? Why are you giving the coins to her? That's 2 entire bags of copper coins. Just how long would they last you? It's my money, so what are you going to do about it? Qin Pingan huffed. Isn't your money also my money? Lu Xianyang said with righteousness. Just think about it. If I borrowed money from you, would you have the heart to demand me to pay it back? Qin Pingan was rendered speechless. He fell deep into thought. At this moment, Lu Xianyang also realized that he had interrupted at an untimely moment. He immediately shut up. The atmosphere in the house became a little heavy. Qin Pingan opened his mouth, saying, Ning Yao, this genuinely won't cause you to. The young woman glanced at the sword in the white scabbard before nodding and replying, there's no problem. Afterward, she couldn't help but add, worrying about this and worrying about that. Don't you find yours LF annoying? And you still say that you're not a foolishly kind person. Qin Pingan replied with a smile. Lu Xianyang pondered for a moment before choosing to remain silent. In the end, the tall and broad young man chose to keep his words to himself, thinking to himself that Ning Yao had never seen the other side of Qin Pingan before. It was very rare that Qin Pingan wouldn't be agreeable and kind. However, when that happened, Qin Pingan would truly become very difficult to speak to. Lu Xianyang had witnessed it before. Qin Pingan's neighbor Song Jisun had most likely witnessed it before as well. Not long after Lu Xianyang arrived, another rare guest arrived in the alley. This was Zhao Yao, an elegant student in Azure. Some aspects of his demeanor were quite similar to Qi Jingjun. Zhao Yao was the eldest grandson of one of the 4 major clans, and compared to the profligate youths of similar backgrounds such as Lu Zhengzhen and the others, his reputation was by far better. Many old and lonely people had received his help before. If one were to accuse him of purposefully cultivating his reputation for ulterior motives, this would seemingly be an overestimation of Zhao Yao's ambitions. It would also be an act of degrading his character. After all, he had already been a kind-hearted and amiable person since he was 10 years old. He had maintained this kindness year after year, not changing in the least. Even the elderly citizens of Fortune Street who had watched him grow up would stick their thumbs up in praise. Every time they scolded their children and the younger generation, they would use Zhao Yao as an example of what they should be like. This caused Zhao Yao to have few close friends the same age as him. Lu Zhengzhen and the others were much more unrestrained, so they naturally didn't like to hang out with a righteous bookworm like Zhao Yao either. After all, one could just imagine a scenario where they were all excitedly climbing on a wall to perv on beautiful women. Yet, someone would suddenly walk up beside them and say that one should not look at that which is improper. Just how much of a turnoff would that be? In any case, Zhao Yao also liked to interact with people outside Fortune Street. During the past few years, he had visited almost all of the alleys, big or small. The only exception was Clay Vase Alley. This was because Song Jisun lived in this valley. This was someone at the same age as him who caused him to feel a sense of shame and inferiority. However, in terms of genuine friends, Zhao Yao was most likely only familiar with Song Jisun, someone whom he played Go with. Even though he had always lost to Song Jisun for all these years, wanting to win was nothing more than just that. In reality, he deeply admired the supremely talented Song Jisun from the bottom of his heart. However, Zhao Yao also felt slightly dejected. Even though Song Jisun was always carefree and laughing merrily with him, with their relationship seemingly as tight-knit as could be, his intuition told him that Song Jisun had never treated him as a genuine and intimate friend. Zhao Yao had never visited Song Jisun's house before, but once he saw that residence, he immediately knew that it was definitely Song Jisun's house. This was because the couplets on the front door were filled with Chinese characters. It was also clear that this was Song Jisun's writing. Zhao Yao could recognize this easily because Song Jisun's writing style changed far too much, with almost every single character looking different. For example, the characters Windsor were written in a single stroke, appearing carefree and elegant. Meanwhile, the water radical of the character Pool was especially long and winding. The character Remarkable appeared uplifting and mighty, and as powerful as a thunderbolt. As for the character Nation, it appeared proper and gentle, much like a gracefully seated sage. There was not a single flaw to be found. Standing before the door, Zhao Yao almost forgot that he needed to knock. His body was slightly leaned forward as he stared at the characters in a daze, and he felt like he was almost about to lose the courage to even knock. It was exactly because he was earnestly practicing calligraphy by copying the characters of others that he knew just how extraordinarily powerful and lively these characters were. Zhao Yao was silent and dejected as he retrieved a pouch of money and bent down to put it next to the door. He was about to leave without even knocking. The door suddenly swung open at this moment. Zhao Yao looked up, only to see Song Jisun and Ji Gui about to head out. The two of them were chattering and laughing. Song Jisun purposefully put on an astonished expression, teasing Zhao Yao, "Why the need for such a grand greeting? What might you want from me?" Zhao Yao awkwardly picked the pouch of money back up. He was just about to explain himself, yet Song Jisun had already snatched the embroidered pouch away, saying with a chuckle, "Haha, Zhao Yao has come over to bring me a gift." Thank you. However, let me say this first. I come from a poor family, so I naturally don't have anything that Brother Zhao will be satisfied with. That being the case, I'll be impolite and not reciprocate your kindness this time. Zhao Yao smiled bitterly and replied, "Just treat this bag of good fortune coins as a farewell gift. There's no need to reciprocate." Song Jisun turned around and smiled at his maidservant as he handed the bag of coins to her. "See, I told you that Zhao Yao was the most courteous student in this small town. What do you say?" Ji Gui accepted the bag of coins and held it before her chest, with her eyes twinkling in happiness. She curtsied and said, "Thank you, young Master Zhao Yao. Young Master has said before that those who do good will be rewarded with fortune. Let this servant offer her best wishes to young Master Zhao, who will surely ascend to the skies and soar boundless distances in the future." Zhao Yao hurriedly clasped his hands and bowed in return, saying, "Thank you for your blessings, Ji Gui." Song Jisun stroked the back of his head and yawned, saying, "Are you two not tired of this?" Ji Gui smiled and said, "If we can get a bag of coins each time, I won't become tired even if I have to curtsy 10,000 times." Zhao Yao blushed with shame. "I'm sorry that I'll have to disappoint you, Ji Gui." Song Jisun waved his hand and said, "Let's go. Let's have a drink." Zhao Yao wore a difficult expression. However, Song Jisun kept goading him, saying, "What a blockhead. All you've learned are some stubborn and inflexible rules. How can I not help you learn some spirit and taste? A few sips to lighten the mood?" Zhao Yao asked tentatively. Song Jisun rolled his eyes. Until we're dead drunk. Zhao Yao was just about to speak, yet Song Jisun had already wrapped his arm around his shoulders and started dragging him along. As Zhihou was locking the door, the four-legged snake tried to sneak out. However, it was immediately kicked back into the courtyard by her. When she walked past the neighboring house, she also secretly got up on tippy toes and shot a few glances over. She saw Lu Xianyang's tall and broad figure, and Lu Xianyang also noticed her looking over. A bright smile immediately spread across his face. Just as he was about to greet her, however, she had already retracted her gaze and started to quickly walk away. There was a restaurant in the small town, and it truly wasn't very big. Even so, it was no cheap place to go. However, Zhao Yao was a member of the Zhao clan, after all, and he also had a very good reputation. Thus, for some unknown reason, the restaurant manager renowned for his stinginess patted his chest and declared that he wouldn't take a single copper coin from them. Moreover, he said that it was the restaurant's honor for these two students to visit and have a drink. Instead of him accepting payment, it was him who should have been paying them. Song Jisun immediately chuckled and held out his hand, asking for a few silver coins. The manager had no option but to huff and back down, saying that he would give it to them some other time. He would send someone over to give Song Jisun a few jars of good wine tomorrow. Throughout this exchange, Zhao Yao wanted to find a hole in the ground to crawl into. However, the restaurant manager knew about Song Jisun's strange temperament, so he didn't get angry about it either. Instead, he personally led the three of them upstairs to a quiet and elegant table near the window. Song Jisun and Zhao Yao didn't talk much, nor did Song Jisun try to persuade Zhao Yao to drink too much. This caused Zhao Yao, who was already resigned to a miserable fate, to find this extremely strange. Looking out from the window on the second floor, they could see one of the plaques, "Doing my part." "Mr. Qi really isn't going to leave with you?" Song Jisun asked. Zhao Yao nodded and replied, "Mr. Qi changed his plans at the last moment, and he said that he's going to stay at school to finish teaching the second last chapter, Understanding Etiquette." Song Jisun sighed with emotion, saying, "Then Mr. Qi is going to teach us about a grand principle. He's going to expound on the virtues of the Confucian sages and tell us about how no law or rules existed during the feudal stages of the world." The sages then appeared and taught the masses about morals and etiquette. Even the rulers during that time held such morals and etiquette in the highest regard, believing that those who went against them needed to be punished. It was because of this that rules of etiquette were created. The etiquette came first and the laws came later. Zhao Yao was already slightly drunk, and he said in a slurring voice, "Do you agree with Mr. Qi's decision? Why didn't he choose to teach the last chapter as well, obeying etiquette?" Song Jisun gave an irrelevant answer, saying, "If we stay in this small town, mountain spirits, river ghosts, immortals, and monsters will only exist if we believe them, and they'll cease to exist if we don't believe them. As for how Mr. Qi teaches, and as for how his students learn, that's up to each person's individual fate." Zhihou had also had a cup to drink, making her appear drowsy and cute. From the beginning to the end, however, she had never taken a single glance at the majestic archway in the distance. Each of the 12 stone pillars of the archway was decorated with a different type of rare beast. 9 of them were the descendants of the dragon, while the remaining 3 were the white tiger, the black tortoise, and the vermilion bird. However, the residents of the small town had resided here for generations, so they were already fully accustomed to these decorations. Zhao Yao couldn't help but burp, standing up shakily and saying, "After we part ways, I hope we can reunite again someday." Song Jisun pondered for a moment before also standing up and saying with a smile, "We'll definitely see each other again." Zhao Yao, don't fret that you won't have an intimate friend. Zhao Yao's vision was already blurry as he bit his tongue and said in sincerity, "Song Jisun, you should also leave as soon as possible. Who in the world won't understand your talent? You can definitely do it." Song Jisun clearly didn't take his words seriously. He waved his hand and said, "Let's go, let's go. You're already slurring and not making sense, and this will only bring disgrace to our refined nature." Zhao Yao and Song Jisun parted ways after leaving the restaurant. Before leaving, and perhaps gaining some courage from all the drinks, Zhao Yao asked Song Jisun, "Should we visit the official residence of the kiln supervision official? I can convince the doorkeeper too." Song Jisun wore a cold expression as he spat, "Piss off." Zhao Yao left in silence. Looking at the disappearing figure, Ji Gui said in a low voice, "Young master, he was only suggesting it out of good intentions." Song Jisun chuckled coldly, saying, "Is it rare for someone's good intentions to lead to an evil deed and a disastrous fate?" Ji Gui mulled over this, and it appeared that this was genuinely the case. Thus, she didn't try to persuade Song Jisun anymore. Zhao Yao lived on Fortune Street, which was in the north of the small town. Meanwhile, Clay Vase Alley was located in the west, along with the rest of the poorer streets. When Song Jisun and Ji Gui walked past the plaques together, Ji Gui glanced up at the plaque that read, "Unmatched Aura." This plaque was already like an old person in their twilight years. The young girl, whose original name was Wang Zhu, wore a discreet smile. After returning to his home on Fortune Street, Zhao Yao was told by a servant that his ancestor was waiting for him in the study and that he needed to head over immediately. The student in azure, who still reeked of alcohol, immediately felt a headache forming. However, he could only muster up the courage to hurry to the study. The Zhao clan wasn't an especially eye-catching clan in the small town, and they always made sure to keep quiet about their wealth. This was unlike the Liu clan, who liked to display their power and liked to brand themselves as a scholarly clan. Even their buildings were designed to look ancient and refined. The old woman had a cane in her hand as she stood beside the study desk and stroked its surface. Her face was filled with vicissitudes, and it was more so filled with a sense of sadness and reminiscence. She didn't become angry after smelling the alcohol on her eldest grandson, and she instead smiled and waved at him, saying, "Yaoer, come on in. Why are you just dawdling by the door? What's wrong with a man having a few drinks? It's not like you're drinking horse piss or anything. It's nothing to be ashamed of." Zhao Yao smiled bitterly as he entered the room and respectfully bowed in greeting. However, the old woman became impatient as she said, "This is the bad thing about reading too many books. There are so many rules and etiquettes to follow, and it causes all you scholars to become so difficult and annoying. Take your grandfather, for example. He excelled in everything, yet he couldn't help but waffle on when he talked to me about the grand principles and etiquette. It was truly annoying, especially his demeanor and tone. TSK, TSK, that was an expression that was asking for a beating. Yet, I couldn't win any argument with him no matter what. I truly wanted to smack him with my cane." The old woman was suddenly amused by her own words, laughing heartily and saying, "I almost forgot. I didn't need a cane during that time." She smiled and asked, "What? Did you have a drink with that ungrateful Song Jisun?" Zhao Yao was slightly exasperated as he replied, "Grandma, how many times do I have to tell you? Song Jisun is extremely talented, and he's always faster than others when learning new principles." The old woman sneered and said, "He is indeed very smart. However, when your grandpa was still alive, he had already seen through this person when he was only 3 years old." "Do you want to know what your grandpa said?" Zhao Yao immediately replied, "No." The old woman ignored her darling grandson's reply and continued, "Your grandpa said that he was especially shrewd and calculating for his age, but it was a shame that the person who eventually disgraced his clan would also be him." She then pointed at Zhao Yao and said, "Your grandpa also said that being gentle, modest, and courteous, and being unextraordinary during one's early years would be a sign of someone who was raised properly. And such a person would be no one else but his grandson." The old woman smiled after saying this. That old geezer was so pedantic his entire life, yet he finally said something that's pleasing to the ear. Zhao Yao was slightly puzzled, and he was just about to speak. However, he heard his grandma sighing with emotion and saying, "I'm getting old now." The young boy had no option but to swallow his words. He smiled as he walked over to support his grandma, saying, "Grandma will live for as long as the southern mountains, so you're still extremely young." The old woman reached over with her wrinkly hand and patted the back of her grandson's hand, saying, "You're much better than your grandpa who could only talk about manners and etiquette." You also understand how to say things that are pleasing to the ear." The young boy smiled and said, "Grandpa was a truly knowledgeable person." Even Mr. Chi said that Grandpa was a meticulous scholar, with his understanding of justice being especially profound. The old woman immediately revealed her true feelings, unable to conceal her pride anymore. However, she purposefully humped in a cold manner and said, "Why, of course. After all, who is that man chosen by?" Zhao Yao pursed his lips and suppressed his smile. The old woman led Zhao Yao to the chair behind the desk, and the young boy immediately discovered a wooden carving of a resting dragon on the desk. This was an especially lively carving, yet upon closer inspection, he realized that the azure dragon had eyes, but no pupils for some reason. The old woman picked up a calligraphy brush that was already soaked with ink. This was a new brush that was carved from a branch of the old locust tree. She held it with her 2 trembling hands as she passed it to her eldest grandson. When Zhao Yao accepted the brush, he suddenly felt a heavy weight on his shoulder. As it turned out, it was his grandma pushing down on his shoulder, signaling for him to take a seat. He obeyed and sat down in the chair that was only meant for the clan leader of the Zhao clan. The old woman took a step back and said in an extremely solemn and dignified voice, "Zhao Yao, take your seat. Today, you'll be responsible for adding the finishing touches for the ancestors of the Zhao clan." An utterly broken clay statue of a god lay sideways on the ground that was filled with weeds, not attended to by anyone. This had been the case for hundreds upon thousands of years. In fact, more and more clay statues would be resigned to this place. Not only did the residents of the small town treat many other matters with disregard, but they had in fact lost most of their respect and reverence toward these statues since long ago. The elderly residents would occasionally say a word or two, telling their young ones not to muck around and play here. However, the young children still liked to play hide-and-seek and catch crickets here. When these children grew old and had grandchildren of their own, perhaps they would also repeat the same words and tell their young ones not to hang out and play here. Generation after generation, this was exactly what had happened. However, nothing untoward had ever happened. Casting one's gaze across, one could see lonely heads, fractured bodies, and severed arms. It was as if someone had forcefully pieced them together to just barely maintain their original appearance. This was perhaps their final shred of dignity. A young boy in straw sandals hurriedly ran over from Clay Vase Alley with 3 offering coins held tightly in his hand. When he arrived, he twisted and turned as he navigated his way around, and he was even reciting something under his breath. He showed much experience as he easily found the statue he was looking for, squatting down and looking around to see that there was no one in the surroundings. Only then did he secretly place the copper coins in a crack on the statue. After standing back up, he went to look for the 2nd statue and the 3rd statue, repeating the same actions at each. Before he left, he stood alone in the lush green grass, clasping his hands in prayer and lowering his head as he quietly recited, "May you have peace year after year, and may you protect my parents and bless them so they won't have to suffer again in their next life. If it's possible, please tell my parents that I'm enjoying a very good life right now and that they don't need to worry about me." When dusk arrived, Qin Pingan passed by the western gates of the small town as he returned home. He saw the disheveled gatekeeper, who was currently humming a tune and singing. Not a single second of time should be wasted, but glory and fortune can all be abandoned. Perhaps alerted by the hurried footsteps of Qin Pingan, he opened his eyes and coincidentally locked gazes with the young boy in sandals who was just entering the gates. The gatekeeper's spirits were greatly dampened upon seeing this boy who always pressed him for payment, and he waved his hands in annoyance and said, go away, what pathetic value is your time worth? If you can somehow experience a modicum of glory and fortune, it'll probably be time for you to offer incense to the gods and your ancestors." As Qin Pingan ran by, he didn't forget to raise his hand up high, putting up all 5 fingers and waving them with vigor. He was clearly reminding the gatekeeper that he still owed him 5 coins for his work. The gatekeeper angrily spat at the floor and cursed, "This kid's not a good person either." The young boy's figure quickly disappeared into the distance. The gatekeeper glanced up at the clear sky, and it was as if it were covered by a beautiful glaze. He stroked his beard stubble and clicked his tongue in wonder, saying, "What was that phrase that Mr. Chi said before? Fine matters something and glazed color something." A cow-drawn cart slowly left the small town at this moment, carrying on it a reputable young student in azure. The cart driver was a middle-aged man with a prudent expression. The gatekeeper immediately waved at them, laughing loudly and saying, "Brother Yao, don't leave yet." There's a phrase on the tip of my tongue, but I can only remember the words fine matters and glazed colors or something. I can't remember the other words at all. However, you're extremely knowledgeable, so tell me what I'm missing. Zhao Yao was in high spirits at this moment, and holding his luggage in his lap, he recited in a loud and clear voice, "Fine matters in the world are fleeting, just like the iridescent clouds in the sky and glazed colors of glassware." The gatekeeper raised his thumb, saying, "As expected of Brother Yao, your knowledge is top-notch. When you make a name for yourself in the future, don't forget to come back to visit me. Perhaps you might even be able to succeed your teacher and become the new teacher for the children in our small town. That will also be quite nice." Zhao Yao faltered upon hearing this. He then clasped his hands and said with a smile, "Thank you for your blessings." In his happiness, the gatekeeper retrieved an embroidered pouch from his sleeves and tossed it at the young student in azure, cracking a smile and saying, "I've asked you for so many couplets these years, and most importantly, you've never felt it to be a hassle. I've always been a good judge of someone's character. Here, a little present for you. Safe travels." Zhao Yao hurriedly caught the pouch of money, saying, "Till we meet again in the future." The gatekeeper waved at the young boy as he smiled and replied with a nod. However, he also murmured, "That'll be difficult." The young boy in sandals was heading into the small town, while the cart that Zhao Yao was on was racing toward the world beyond the small town. The two of them brushed past each other. Sitting on a tree stump, the gatekeeper counted on his fingers, saying, "The young boy from Great Sway Nation with his golden carp, the child of Widow Gu in Clay Vase Alley, and Brother Yao from Fortune Street. There are already 3 people. However, so many outsiders are still rushing in. At that time, won't they only have scraps to pick at? Perhaps I should also seize this opportunity to find a good disciple for myself? One who can massage my shoulders and back." The gatekeeper raised his hand and stroked his wrinkled and tanned face. He then chuckled and said, "If it's a beautiful and shapely female disciple, that will be even better. Meichem, I can endure it even if her looks are a little worse. However, her legs definitely have to be long." The gatekeeper, renowned for being single, placed his hands behind his head and looked up at the sky, cheerily amusing himself. With these happy thoughts in mind, his feelings of anxiety were brushed away as well. He felt like there was majestic beauty in the world. Before leaving Clay Vase Alley, Qin Pingan had already promised Lu Xianyang and Ning Yao to directly meet them at Lu Xianyang's house when he returned. When Qin Pingan arrived, he found that the door was unlocked, so he directly pushed it open and entered. What greeted him was the sight of Lu Xianyang using a fresh cloth to scrub and clean his treasured suit of armor. Meanwhile, Ning Yao had started wearing her veiled hat again. There was a saber resting by her waist, while the sword in the white scabbard was being casually held in her hands. For some reason, Qin Pingan had a nagging feeling that Ning Yao had a feeling of disdain toward the sword. The ancient treasure that had been passed down for generations in the Lu family was referred to as a suit of armor, yet in Qin Pingan's eyes, it was so ugly that it was truly frightening. The large suit of armor was filled with metal lumps that looked like dry tree burls, and there were more so 5 deep claw marks that ran all the way from the left shoulder down to the right waist. Regarding this, both of the young boys were at a total loss. They couldn't imagine what kind of gigantic mountain beast could wield such devastating power to leave such terrifying marks. Later, when the imperial court restricted entry into many mountains and stopped the residents of the small town from entering to collect firewood, Qin Pingan and Lu Xianyang abided by this rule without question, never once violating it. The claw marks on the suit of armor were a big reason for this. Qin Pingan found Lu Xianyang's attitude toward the suit of armor quite strange. The charcoal-like suit of armor was indeed very ugly, but Lu Xianyang genuinely treated it like it was a treasure that had been passed down through the generations. Even as close as he was to Chen Ping'an, he had only shown this suit of armor to him once. Moreover, he had carefully placed it back inside the vermilion case after just a few minutes. However, Chen Ping'an immediately felt a sense of understanding when he saw Lu Xianying stealing occasional glances at the young woman in black. Lu Xianying had always been like this. Whenever he saw a girl, he could never control his own gaze. However, this didn't mean that he actually liked them. Instead, he simply liked to show off before them. For example, while bathing in the creek near the covered bridge during summer, Lu Xianying would immediately try to show off his skills when a girl of the same age passed by. He would hurriedly climb onto the large green stone on the bank first. Then he would cough loudly in what Chen Ping'an referred to as an act of making an announcement to the world. Finally, he would dive headfirst into the water. With Chen Ping'an's sharp eyesight, he could clearly see the expressions of the girls in the distance. Thus, he had always wanted to tell Lu Xianying the truth. When they saw his actions, the good-looking girls would either roll their eyes or curse under their breaths. Meanwhile, even more of them would completely ignore him, not even giving him a single glance. The only expression that they never showed was one of admiration and one where they viewed him as an impressive man. Of course, Lu Xianying fell for Ji Gui afterward, and he mysteriously became enchanted by her. From that moment onward, it was as if there were no other woman who could attract his attention. Even though he was acting all generous and extravagant before Ning Yao, this was more so in the hopes that the aloof young woman wouldn't underestimate him. He wanted to show her that she wasn't the boss just because she wielded a saber and a sword. He, Lu Xianying, also had a suit of armor that couldn't be found anywhere else in the small town. Ning Yao looked around after Chen Ping'an arrived, and in the end, she placed her sword on an ancient and ornate cabinet that was decorated with golden flowers. However, the paint on this cabinet was already cracking and peeling, and she also had to push aside many jars and other miscellaneous items to make some space for her sword. While doing this, she discovered that there was a mosaic of a golden kasha embedded behind the cabinet with a full moon filling a corner. She turned around and said, "I'm leaving my sword here. Don't touch it, or you'll have to face the consequences yourself." I'm not joking. Lu Xianying was busy scrubbing the suit of armor, and from time to time, he would lean down and breathe onto it before directly using his forearm to wipe it clean. He was already engrossed in this task. Definitely, Chen Ping'an promised. The young woman turned to Lu Xianying and said, "This cabinet isn't worth anything, but the mosaic of the golden kasha embedded into it is a different story altogether. Don't sell it for a cheap price. I've never liked that painting ever since I was a young child. If you like it, you can scrape it off and keep it yourself," Lu Xianying replied without even raising his head. Ning Yao naturally wouldn't spoil such a valuable item. She simply asked in curiosity, "What's this mosaic made from?" Lu Xianying turned around and shot a glance at it before replying, "How would I know? It's several hundred years old, and even my grandpa wasn't able to explain its origin. It's most likely made from pebbles found in the creek," Chen Ping'an said softly. These pebbles come in many different colors, but Lu Xianying's ancestors only chose the golden ones at that time. They then crushed them before gluing them together. We call these pebbles snake gall pebbles. Pebbles? Are there many of them in the creek? Ning Yao asked. Chen Ping'an smiled and replied, "If you want, I can collect a large basketful of them for you every day." Apart from Gu Kan, no one here likes these pebbles. Only he frequents the creek to collect these pebbles. The young woman in black sighed. She looked deeply at the poor young boy from Clay Vase Alley and said, "You're a poor sod living on a mountain of gold." Chen Ping'an was astonished. These pebbles are valuable in the outside world. Ning Yao fixed her veiled hat and replied, "This depends on who obtains them. In addition, even if they end up in the hands of someone who knows how to use them, whether or not the person succeeds is still up to luck. If they're lucky, one pebble will be enough. If they're unlucky, however, even a mountain of pebbles won't be enough. Regardless, these pebbles are indeed valuable in the outside world. Very, very valuable. However, I don't know whether we can take these pebbles out of this small town. This is the most important thing." Lu Xianying interrupted her at this moment, saying, "There's something strange about these pebbles. After removing them from the creek, they'll immediately lose their luster if they're subject to wind or sunshine. This is especially the case after bouts of rain or snow. They'll lose their luster at an incredible speed. Apart from this, there's nothing special about them. As expected, Ningyao said in pity. Qin Ping'an hesitated for a brief moment before saying, "How about I collect a basket of them tomorrow? What if there are exceptions?" The young woman shook her head. "It won't make much difference for me." Lu Xianyang had already finished cleaning the suit of armor and put it away at this moment. Leaning on the door, he smiled and said, "Qin Ping'an is extremely avaricious, so perhaps he'll already be heading over to the creek to collect pebbles tonight." "I'm leaving now," Ningyao said. When she arrived at the door, she turned around and said, "I'll take care of the hairpin and prescription papers for you. However, I still need you to come over and help brew medicine for me tomorrow." Qin Ping'an nodded and said, "No problem." Ningyao pondered for a moment before warning them with a solemn expression, "Among the outsiders who entered the small town at around the same time as me, the most powerful person is most likely the old man from Sun-Scorched Mountain. He's especially come here to protect the little girl. After him is the eunuch from Great Sui Nation who injured me. Then after him is Lu Jimao, the person who took Gukan away. You can't underestimate the woman who hides daggers under her smiles either. So, try your best not to get into a conflict with the old man from Sun-Scorched Mountain. However, if you do get into a conflict with him, do everything you can to buy some time. Don't try to fight him, and don't have any thoughts of getting lucky. You have to buy enough time for me to arrive. These outsiders who are unfamiliar with our small town truly dare to kill us on our own turf?" Lu Xianyang asked in a low voice. Qin Ping'an glanced at him before nodding and saying, "They do." Lu Xianyang gulped upon hearing this. "Do you still remember Daoist Lu, the fortune teller with the stall?" Qin Ping'an suddenly asked. "What did he say to you?" Lu Xianyang was stumped upon hearing this. He tried his best to remember, scratching his chin and saying, "How am I supposed to remember? I only know that they were some ill-omened words. In any case, it was something about a large calamity and having to offer incense or some random crap like that. I merely treated him as a scammer and his words as nonsense during that time." Qin Ping'an turned around to look at the young woman in black. "If he doesn't remember properly, how in the world can I explain it for him? Am I a god or something?" Ningyao said ferociously. Qin Ping'an was slightly puzzled, unsure of why Ningyao had suddenly become so angry. Ningyao strode away from Lu Xianyang's house. Compared to her calm and relaxed manner when arriving, she appeared much more vigorous and speedy. Walking through a wide alley, the young woman with a saber hanging by her waist pondered whether she needed to read a few more books in her spare time. Thinking about how she would travel the world in the future and how she would utter a few majestic and inspiring phrases after resolutely beheading her enemies with her flying sword, she couldn't help but feel that she would appear extremely dashing and impressive. This would be the case even if there were no one to witness her glorious achievements. Just as she was daydreaming about this, a familiar figure shot past her like a rushing gust of wind. "See you tomorrow, Ningyao." When his words reached her ears, he had already disappeared down the other side of the alley. The young boy in sandals was carrying a basket on his back as he sped down the alley. Ningyao was transfixed with astonishment. "There's genuinely such an avaricious person in the world," she murmured to herself. The young boy ran under the night sky that was filled with twinkling stars, continuing all the way to the creek after exiting the small town. Even though it was night, Qin Ping'an didn't run any slower than if it were day. When he arrived, he purposefully avoided the covered bridge where the water would be the deepest. That section of the creek was far deeper than the other sections. Instead, he chose a section of the creek that was only knee-deep before shrugging off the basket and bending down to retrieve a small bamboo basket that was hidden inside it. He tied this to his waist before taking off his shoes and rolling up his pants. Only after doing all this did he enter the creek to search for pebbles. The wound on his left hand still caused him stabbing pain, so it naturally couldn't be drenched in water. As a result, he could only use his right hand to sift through the rocks at the bottom of the creek. In reality, it would be easiest to collect pebbles from the dried banks of the creek. However, just like Lu Xianyang had said, The luster of these pebbles would be greatly reduced due to their exposure to wind and sunlight. Now that Chen Ping'an roughly understood their secret thanks to Ning Yao, this wasn't hard to understand. He felt like these pebbles were just like the soil that he had tasted while traversing the mountains with Old Man Yao. Even though the soil looked ordinary, the distance of just one mountain could cause them to taste completely different when put in the mouth. Old Man Yao referred to this as trees move when dead, and humans move when alive, while soil moved from their homes transform into statues placed high. Once soil was removed from its original habitat, it would very quickly change in taste. The creek didn't have a name. There were all kinds of different pebbles resting in this creek, some as big as a fist and others as small as a thumb. However, the generations of residents in the small town had already grown accustomed to seeing these colorful pebbles, so it was only natural that they didn't treat them as anything rare or valuable. If someone collected these pebbles and brought them home, they would definitely be laughed at and mocked as someone with nothing better to do. If they had so much spare time and energy, wouldn't they be better off doing some work on the farms? Would they not be utter fools? Bending down in the creek, Chen Ping'an continued to flip around and move aside the larger rocks on the bottom. He had already collected 7 or 8 pebbles and placed them in his bamboo basket. They varied in size and color, with some pebbles appearing as golden orange as the tangerines in autumn, while others appeared as white and smooth as the skin of an infant. There was also a pebble so pitch black that it almost glowed, and a pebble that appeared as bright as a large red peach blossom. No two pebbles looked the same. Most of these pebbles that were referred to as snake gall pebbles by the residents of the small town weren't large. However, they were all quite smooth and weighty when held in the hand. If one held them up to the sunlight during the day, or before the candlelight during the night, the silk-like veins inside the pebbles would become especially clear, appearing like snaking fish. Holding the pebbles further away, their exterior would then glimmer like the scales of fish and snakes. After around 2 hours, Chen Ping'an had already mostly filled up the bamboo basket that was tied to his waist. He returned to where he had left his large basket and straw sandals. He then walked to the banks to grab a few handfuls of reeds, laying them on the bottom of the basket before transferring the pebbles over one by one. With his straw sandals in one hand, his bamboo basket by his waist, and his large basket on his back, he walked to another section of the creek before once again placing down his straw sandals and large basket. He then entered the creek and continued to sift through pebbles and rocks. After filling half of the bamboo basket, Chen Ping'an straightened his back and looked up at the starry sky, hoping to catch a glimpse of a shooting star lighting up the night sky. However, it was clear that he wouldn't be so lucky tonight. After coming back to his senses, Chen Ping'an continued to rely on the faint glow of the stars and his extremely good vision to do what an avaricious person should do. Each time he found a satisfactory pebble, he would feel a sincere sense of joy from the bottom of his heart. To the young boy, each pebble was like a pebble of hope. Before he knew it, Chen Ping'an had already filled most of the bamboo basket. There were 80-odd pebbles, with the largest of them being even bigger than his fist. Its color was especially eye-catching as well, appearing like a bright red orb of blood that didn't make one feel any sense of discomfort. There were almost no flaws or cracks on the large pebble either. Chen Ping'an climbed up the bank and headed toward the next section of the creek. At the same time, he fiddled with a medium-sized snake gall pebble. It was a light green color, even lighter than the plum green pottery in this small town. It was also smooth and round, making it appear especially adorable. Chen Ping'an immediately took a liking to this pebble. He walked toward the large green stone cliff on the banks. During the hot summer days, the children of the small town would often come here to bathe. The water under the cliff was especially deep, with the deepest part of it measuring 2 Chen Ping'ans deep. This depth was only second to the deepest part of the creek, the area under the covered bridge. Those who were skilled in the water loved coming here to see who could stay underwater for the longest. Chen Ping'an had chosen this area because he had discovered a great number of snake gall pebbles in the pits underwater while bathing here with Lu Xianyang before. In order to show off his skills one time, Lu Xianyang had purposefully dived down and returned with a large snake gall pebble under his armpit. Chen Ping'an remembered that the snake gall pebble was at least as large as Gukan's head. It was white and translucent, and one could even see faint red lines and dots inside the pebble. It was as if they were blossom leaves that had been frozen inside. At the time, Lu Xianyang had felt like he had accomplished something great, so he had asked Qin Ping'an to help him carry the large pebble back home. After arriving back in town, however, the tall and broad boy who always changed his mind had felt like this was boring, so he had told Qin Ping'an to deal with the large pebble himself. Immediately after arriving on Clay Vase Alley, Qin Ping'an had discovered his neighbor Ji Gui following behind him. She had remained silent, yet her eyes had been intently fixed on the large snake gall pebble in his hands. In fact, her expression had been like Qin Ping'an's expression when he looked at the meat buns being sold in Apricot Blossom Alley. Unable to withstand her intense gaze, Qin Ping'an had ultimately chosen to give the pebble to her. However, she had been unable to carry it, and she had almost dropped it on her feet. Thus, Qin Ping'an had decided to carry it to Song Jisun's courtyard for her. As for where this pebble was now, Qin Ping'an had no idea at all. The pebble had been clear and translucent like water. Amid it had been fluttering red decorations like floating blossom leaves. This was just like the lush and verdant peach blossoms after a period of rain in Peach Leaf Valley. Even though Qin Ping'an had never understood the value and mysterious nature of these pebbles before today, he had still felt like that pebble was extremely beautiful from the bottom of his heart. Qin Ping'an sighed and suddenly stopped in his tracks. Approximately 30 meters away, atop the green stone cliff, there sat a young girl in green whose cheeks were bulging with food. However, she still continued to stuff food into her mouth. Qin Ping'an's first thought was that this young girl had most likely been starved to death in her previous life. It was because of this that she was still so pitifully hungry in the middle of the night. Qin Ping'an pondered for a moment before deciding not to go any further. He was afraid of ruining her mood as she ate. However, he didn't turn around to leave either. After all, he had already decided to dive into that pit to try his luck tonight. He would bring 1 or 2 pebbles up each time, and as long as he persisted, he would eventually have success. In any case, the snake gall pebbles in this pit were larger and more dazzling than those in other areas of the creek. Qin Ping'an wasn't as good a diver as Lu Xianyang, but he certainly wasn't a bad diver either. However, to his surprise, the young girl retrieved another item of food from beside her after finishing what was in her hand, not pausing for even a second. Her cheeks were perpetually filled and bulging. Thinking that he would need to spend more energy on diving in a while, Qin Ping'an turned around and put the heavy basket of pebbles down. However, he had underestimated the hearing ability of the young girl. Even though his actions had been careful, the young girl's ears immediately perked up, and her gaze immediately swept over. It wasn't like Qin Ping'an could tell her to eat slowly either, so he could only look over with an awkward smile on his face. The young girl appeared slightly dazed, and after burping twice, it was as if she had accidentally choked on some food. She hurriedly straightened her back and used her hand to forcefully pat her chest. It was also at this moment that Qin Ping'an realized that she was quite young. Even so, the scenes beneath her neck were truly majestic and grand. It was no inferior to the women who had raised many children. Her clothes were extremely stretched around her chest. Qin Ping'an hurriedly retracted his gaze, not a single impure thought in his mind. Only at this moment did the young girl suddenly remember that she had a bottle of water. She didn't forget to turn her back to Qin Ping'an as she took a large swig of water. Her breathing immediately became much smoother. At this moment, there was only a single thought in the young boy's mind. That was, the material of this young girl's clothes was definitely very expensive. Otherwise, there was simply no way they could withstand such immense pressure. The young girl in green continued to enjoy her feast. However, she was far more restrained now, and her cheeks weren't bulging in such an impressive manner either. Instead, her head was lowered as she took small bites from her snacks. From time to time, she would shoot a sideways glance at the strange boy from the small town. Her eyes were like peach blossoms, and her eyebrows were also slightly curled upward, making her appear much like a young fox spirit. It was as if she were asking the young boy a question with her eyes. What's wrong? Keep going. Qin Ping'an wore a helpless expression as he pointed at the water beneath the green stone cliff and shouted, "I'm not passing by. I want to enter the creek from there." The young girl remained silent as she looked at the skinny young boy. Qin Ping'an hurriedly retrieved a pebble from his basket and explained, "I'm going to collect some pebbles from over there." As if suddenly remembering something important, the young girl suddenly raised a finger to her mouth, signaling for Qin Ping'an to be quiet. She then shuffled over, clearly making space for Qin Ping'an to pass her. She wouldn't be in Qin Ping'an's way now. Qin Ping'an had no option but to pick up his basket and muster some courage to walk over. Fortunately, the green stone cliff was quite spacious, being large enough to fit a dozen or so people. Moreover, the young girl had already shuffled to the side, and her legs were no longer stretched across the middle like before. Rather, she was sitting with her legs crossed, with a bag that was filled with all kinds of desserts and snacks on her lap. This was a small mountain of food. Right now, she had only finished a small corner of this mountain. Qin Ping'an placed his straw sandals, large basket, and bamboo basket on the ground. He had initially wanted to dive shirtless, especially since it was night. However, this was not an option now. After all, there was an unfamiliar young girl sitting next to him. Even if she didn't scream, Qin Ping'an would still have his legs broken if her parents and elders were to see or hear about this. That would truly be a miserable and undeserved fate. After making his way to the edge of the stone cliff, Qin Ping'an suddenly leaped forward and dived into the depths of the pit. It wasn't long before he resurfaced with a palm-sized pebble. However, it was a shame that this wasn't a snake gall pebble. Qin Ping'an could only wipe his face and dive down again. After 3 attempts, he finally managed to obtain a dark green snake gall pebble. Qin Ping'an was dripping wet as he climbed back onto the stone cliff and placed the snake gall pebble into his basket. He then dived into the water again. From the beginning to the end, the young girl had kept her back facing him, busily feasting on her snacks. In less than an hour, Qin Ping'an had already collected 7 or 8 snake gall pebbles. Apart from the first one appearing slightly duller, the rest of the pebbles were all large and brilliant. The previous time he returned, however, there was no snake gall pebble in his hands. Instead, there was a fish that measured as long as his palm. The people in the small town referred to this type of fish as rock slate fish, and this was because these fish liked to hide under slates of rock when they encountered people. These fish were extremely succulent, and generally speaking, they would only be as long as a person's finger. It was extremely rare to see a rock slate fish as large as the one in Qin Ping'an's hands. In fact, Qin Ping'an had already caught a few of these fish while searching through the stones and pebbles before, but he had chosen to release them to collect some snake gall pebbles instead. This time, however, a brilliant thought had suddenly occurred to him. Why didn't he catch a dozen or so fish and brew some fish soup for Ningyao tomorrow? That would be fairly nice too, wouldn't it? After returning to shore, Qin Ping'an casually tossed the fish into the bamboo basket. The second time he resurfaced with a fish, he suddenly discovered the young girl squatting next to the bamboo basket and looking at the lonely fish inside. He could see the radiance and energy on her face, and her expression was identical to the one that Jigui had worn while she had been staring at the large pebble in his arms at that time. Qin Ping'an tossed the second rock slate fish into the bamboo basket. The young girl slowly looked up. Meanwhile, the barefooted young boy had already turned around and entered the creek again. After hearing the young boy plop into the water, the young girl speedily grabbed a fish in each hand, looking down at their flopping bodies and saying with a serious nod, "How impressive." The young girl in green knew that there were many strange things in this small town. For example, the iron chain hanging on the well in Apricot Blossom Alley was heaven knows how long. Nearby, the covered bridge had actually been a 3,000-year-old stone arch bridge before. Beneath it was an iron sword that was covered in rust. Where the tip of the blade pointed was a dark green pool that seemingly had no bottom. There was also the crab archway with 12 legs, the fallen and broken clay statues near the ancestral hall, the mountain of porcelain in the north that was filled with smashed pottery that had failed to pass the inspections of the kiln supervision officials, and so on. In fact, she knew the reason and secrets behind most of these things. She had traveled to many places with her father since a very young age, so she could genuinely be regarded as someone who had seen and experienced many wonders of the world. However, when Qin Ping'an returned with the third fish, the already empty-handed young girl was still squatting next to the bamboo basket. It was just that she was still secretly wiping her hands on her clothes. She looked up at the barefooted young boy, and it was as if she were a commoner looking up at a god. Qin Ping'an felt extremely uncomfortable under her strange gaze, so he asked in an uncertain voice, "You want these fish?" The young girl subconsciously nodded in earnest. Qin Ping'an smiled and said, "Then I'll give these 3 fish to you. I'll catch some more later." The young girl blinked before smiling in delight. Her joyful expression was bewitching, and much like a fox spirit, Qin Ping'an was especially familiar with this kind of expression. Indeed, this was exactly how he had looked at Lu Xianyang when he was young. At that time, Lu Xianyang had been the leader of the young children in Apricot Blossom Alley. He was always catching snakes, hunting birds, and reeling in fish, and it was as if there were nothing in the world that he couldn't do. Afterward, some of the children who used to follow Lu Xianyang around went to become disciples at the Dragon Kiln, while more of them went on to become attendants in the small stores around the town or became accountants for their relatives. There were also those who were good for nothing, in the words of Song Jisun, and these people would go to the farms to do hard labor. In the end, only Qin Ping'an still hung out with Lu Xianyang. Qin Ping'an used a few dog-tail reeds to string the rock slate fish together before handing them to the young girl. The young girl weighed them in her hands after accepting them, and she realized that they were quite light. She felt like this wasn't enough to cook a dish of fried fish with green peppers. Thus, she cocked her head and glanced at the pit in the creek, her eyes filled with eager anticipation. Qin Ping'an understood her expression, and he said in an apologetic voice, "I have to brew some soup with the fish that I catch from now on, so I can't give you any more." The young girl pointed at the bag of food nearby, signifying that she could use some of her snacks as payment. However, Qin Ping'an shook his head with a smile, saying, "Sorry, even though the snacks are tasty, and even though they're filling, they're still not as nutritious and nourishing as fish soup." The young girl nodded in understanding, not forcing Qin Ping'an to cater to her whims. She quietly returned to her spot before carefully putting down the fish. She then continued to tackle her small mountain of food. Even though Qin Ping'an was curious about her identity, he didn't ask her who she was. Judging by her outfit, she didn't look like the darling daughter of some rich family in Peach Leaf Alley. Instead, she appeared more similar to the neighboring Zhuhou. She was pretty, but she didn't like to speak. Qin Ping'an suddenly felt a little worried. She wasn't a maidservant who had stolen some food and sneaked out to enjoy it, right? He had heard that those large families were extremely strict. Lu Xianyang and Song Jisun always liked to disagree with each other, but when it came to this matter, they were surprisingly united in agreement. However, Lu Xianyang's explanation had been especially frightening. He said that inside the tall walls of those homes, the maidservants would be watched like prey by the hawk-eyed housekeepers. If their manner of walking was off by just a little, the housekeepers would immediately command someone to break their legs and toss them outside, where they would wait for death to arrive. However, Song Jisun had accused Lu Xianyang of false information, saying that it wasn't so extreme. Even so, he agreed that the maidservants in these large families did indeed have to tiptoe around like cats. They weren't allowed to make any sound when they walked. Upon seeing Zhuhou secretly chuckling in delight, Lu Xianyang's embarrassment had immediately turned into anger, causing him to curse at Song Jisun. In the end, Qin Ping'an caught another 7 or 8 rock slate fish, with their jumping and flopping causing the bamboo basket to rock back and forth. The pale-faced young boy knew that he was almost at his limit. The water was especially cold during spring, and this was a chilling cold that directly pierced into the bones. Most importantly, the wound on his left hand couldn't take so much stress. After returning onshore for the last time, Qin Ping'an jumped off the green stone cliff in haste and hurriedly scurried into the tall grass next to the creek. There was a lot of rustling, and after a short while, he pulled up 3 or 4 different kinds of grass, many of which still had soil hanging on their roots. Holding a bunch of grass in one hand, he then picked up an ordinary piece of rock. After returning to the stone cliff, he found a naturally formed pothole that was the size of his palm. After wiping it clean, he started to lightly crush the grass, which quickly became a blob of green paste. The unique and fresh fragrance of spring grass wafted through the air. With his back to the young girl, Chen Ping'an took a deep breath as he gritted his teeth and started to remove the cloth wrapped around his left hand. Sweat dripped down his forehead, quickly replacing the ice-cold creek water that had been dripping down from his hair. Even though his wound had healed a little compared to before, when his bones had been visible, it was still a ghastly and bloody sight. Before coming here, Chen Ping'an hadn't imagined that he would be getting his left hand wet. Thus, he hadn't prepared any strips of cotton cloth. Just then, he had been completely focused on collecting snake gall pebbles to earn money and on catching some fish to brew some soup. Only now did he realize that he had made a huge mistake. He was slightly at a loss. However, a hand suddenly appeared before him, holding several strips of dry and clean cloth. As it turned out, the young girl had ripped a few strips of cloth from her sleeve at some time. Chen Ping'an smiled in grief, and he had no time to express gratitude to the young girl as he rubbed the grass paste onto his wound. He then used his teeth and right hand to tightly wrap the strips of cloth around his left hand before tying a knot. His movements were extremely practiced and smooth, yet they also appeared quick and dizzying like a butterfly fluttering around a flower. After wrapping his wound, Chen Ping'an used his right arm to wipe the sweat from his face. His arms were trembling uncontrollably. Squatting not far away from him, the young girl raised a thumb at Chen Ping'an, her expression telling him that he was very impressive. Chen Ping'an pointed at his eyes with his right hand and said with a bitter smile, "Actually, it hurts so much that I'm shedding tears." The young girl was slightly puzzled as she glanced at the large basket and bamboo basket that the young boy had weaved by himself. Chen Ping'an wore an awkward expression as he said, "Those pebbles can make me money, and those fish are also very important." The young girl was still a bit befuddled, but she still refused to open her mouth to speak. Her eyes appeared slightly vacant as she turned around to stare at the glistening creek in a daze. The bubbling water made a rushing sound as it crashed against the exposed stones and pebbles. At that moment, the stars were dazzling and the world was tranquil, and it was as if only this young boy and young girl pair existed in the world. Chen Ping'an gradually calmed down, with his hurried breathing subconsciously starting to return to normal. This was much like a thunderous waterfall transforming into a small and peaceful creek. This was a gradual and subtle change that even the young boy wasn't aware of. It occurred completely naturally. With his body still wet, Chen Ping'an knew that he couldn't stand in the early spring breeze for too long. He needed to hurry back home to change. The young boy naturally didn't understand medicine, nor did he understand the methods to maintain good health. However, being extremely afraid of falling sick, the young boy had already developed a keen sense of the changing seasons and the reactions of his body since a very young age. Thus, he quickly put on his straw sandals and tied the basket of fish to his waist. He then slung the large basket on his back and waved at the young girl in green, saying with a smile, "I'm leaving now. You should also go home soon." As he walked down the stone cliff, he couldn't help but turn around and say in warning, "The water is extremely deep around the covered bridge, so you have to be especially careful not to slip. When you return home, it's best that you walk along the paddy field side. Even if you fall, getting yourself muddy is still better than falling into the creek." As he said this, Chen Ping'an suddenly felt like his words were slightly ominous and ill-omened. It didn't sound like a reminder, and it instead sounded more like the curses spoken by Gukan's mother. Chen Ping'an quickly shut his mouth, not waffling on anymore. He quickened his pace and ran north toward the small town. The basket on his back was very heavy. However, the young boy in straw sandals was also very happy. After untying the knot in his heart, Chen Ping'an, for the first time, felt like he had to fight on and live a good life. For example, he had to earn money. He wanted to be able to afford the couplets that smelled like ink, and he also wanted to be able to afford the colorful door gods. At the same time, he also wanted enough money to enjoy the meat buns sold by Aunt Mao, And it would also be best if he could have some money to buy a cow. Raising some chickens like Song Jisun would also be nice. Meanwhile, the young girl continued to tirelessly tackle the mountain of food before her. Her expression was especially solemn and serious, and each time she picked up a piece of food, it was as if she were facing a mortal enemy. Just as she was tackling a peach cake, her body suddenly froze. When she realized she was in trouble, her first reaction wasn't to turn around and flee. Instead, it was to open her mouth and gobble down the piece of cake. She then wiped her hands clean and quietly waited for calamity to befall her. At some unknown time, a man had already appeared beside her. He wasn't especially tall, yet he gave others a feeling that he was extremely solidly built. However, others definitely wouldn't mistake him for being a villager or farmer. This was because his gaze was far too intense, so much so that others wouldn't dare to look him in the eyes. Looking at the remaining corner of the mountain, in the bag that was decorated with patterns of flowers, an expression of utter helplessness spread across his face. He wanted to open his mouth to scold her, yet he couldn't bring himself to do this either. Silently looking at the stubborn expression of his daughter who was resigned to a scolding, he more so felt a sense of doting that made him feel like it was actually him who was in the wrong. The man really wanted to say some gentle words to lighten the atmosphere. For example, telling his daughter that she could eat near the forge if she became hungry, and that he would head to town to buy more snacks for her if she finished them all. However, when these words reached the tip of his tongue, the introverted man couldn't spit them out no matter what. It was as if his tongue would freeze at this critical moment, rendering him unable to comfort his daughter. At this moment, the man felt like he was even less capable than the young boy in straw sandals. At the very least, his daughter wouldn't need to be so tense around him. The young girl in green suddenly looked up and asked, "Father, why didn't you accept him as a disciple?" With his daughter breaking the ice, the man suddenly felt as if a huge weight had been lifted off his shoulder. Even though he wore a stern expression, the man had already taken a seat next to his daughter, explaining, "That child has a fairly good personality. However, his aptitude is far too poor, so even if your father takes him as a disciple, he'll still be quickly left in the dust by his other senior brothers. Regardless of how hard he works, he can only watch on helplessly as the gulf between them grows larger and larger. What should we do if another senior brother Lu appears at that time? What's the need?" A dejected expression washed across the face of the young girl in green. It was hard to say whether this was because of senior brother Lu, or whether this was because the young boy in straw sandals had brushed shoulders with this opportunity. The man hesitated for a moment before deciding not to hide any information, lest his daughter did something wrong or ruin the sage's plans. Moreover, that young child is far too ordinary. In some sense, this makes him appear even more extraordinary in this small town. Sure, perhaps you aren't aware, but this child's bonded porcelain was smashed by someone when he was only very young. Thus, he's something like a wandering ghost with no links and nothing to rely on. He's not protected by the blessings of his ancestors. At the same time, all kinds of subtle but strange things occur around him. This is also the reason why Song Jisun and that female chose to become his neighbors. Otherwise, with Song Jisun's status, could he not live on Fortune Street? This naturally isn't the case. The young girl carefully pondered for a moment before replying, "Father, are you saying that he's something like fate?" The man stroked her head and said, "Something like that." He then smiled and continued, "If the two of us weren't swordsmen who are the least particular about external matters, fated opportunities, and so on, perhaps I might have kept him by my side. Maybe I would have been able to help him a little." The young girl in green was in low spirits at this moment. The man sighed with emotion and said, "Sure, my words might be crude, but my reasoning certainly isn't. Don't be annoyed that my words don't sound nice." However, the young girl in green still appeared dejected, unable to lift her spirits no matter what. The man pondered for a moment before pointing at the covered bridge that looked like a black dragon lying across a river. The Great Li Empire exhausted a huge amount of money and effort to construct that covered bridge. The only reason was to suppress that seemingly inconspicuous iron sword. Just think about it. This is a 3,000-year-old sword with a damaged soul and no owner. However, in order to suppress its remnant might, an entire empire still needed to pay such a huge price, their goal nothing more than to suppress it for a brief moment. The young girl nodded in response. However, her head was still hanging, and as she glanced at the remaining corner of food, she absent-mindedly replied, "Oh, how impressive." The man didn't know whether to laugh or to cry as he pinched his forehead. The heaven was important and the earth was important, but above them both, eating was the most important. However, his daughter's mother wasn't such a glutton either. So, just who in the world was she taking after? The man patted his daughter's shoulder and said in a gentle voice, "Your father's going to visit someone. You can stay here, but make sure to eat slowly. No one's going to steal your food." The young girl suddenly looked up and grabbed onto the man's arm, with the crimson bracelet on her hand shining brightly and appearing much like a curled-up flood dragon. It was like a lively flood dragon that was composed of flames. So you do still have some heart. All right, don't worry now. Your father's going to visit Mr. Qi, the man said with a gratified smile. The young girl let go and immediately turned her attention back to the snacks, starting to scoff them down again. The man was immediately filled with frustration, and he was unable to suppress the words in his stomach any longer, mumbling, "Eat, eat, eat." That brat Lu Xianyang indeed deserves a beating. However, his words genuinely weren't wrong. There'll eventually come a day when you eat so much that you become a fat and chubby girl. At that time, who will dare to marry you? Or did you want me to kidnap a husband for you? The young girl stopped eating, with a dessert resting in her hands as tears brimmed in her eyes. The man hurriedly fled, not forgetting to slap himself when his back was to his daughter. It was like this every single time. He would always screw up at the final moment. It was past midnight, and when Chen Ping'an arrived back at Lu Xianyang's house and opened the door, all he could hear was his friend's thunderous snores. How relaxed. If it were Chen Ping'an, he definitely wouldn't be able to sleep so peacefully tonight. He placed the large basket and the bamboo basket in the kitchen in the courtyard first. He then went to the right side wing room that Lu Xianyang had cleared out for him and hurriedly changed into some fresh clothes. Only then did he return to the kitchen in the courtyard to clean and prepare the rock slate fish. After doing this, he placed them in a clean porcelain dish. He then used another dish to cover them up. This was to keep out any insects and vermin. Afterward, Chen Ping'an retrieved his favorite 5 or 6 snake gall pebbles from the large basket and took them to the wing room where he was staying. Just then, he had also taken a glance at the sword that Ningyao had placed on the cabinet. It was still quietly resting there. After doing all this, Chen Ping'an finally crawled into bed, with his body slowly warming up. However, his eyes were still wide open. Part of this was because of the stabbing pain in his left hand, and part of this was because he didn't feel tired at all. However, the true reason was because Chen Ping'an knew better than Lu Xianyang just how unreasonable those outsiders were. The young boy didn't dare to sleep too soundly, and thus, Chen Ping'an remained awake for the entire night, keeping his ears pricked for any sound in the courtyard or near the doors. When dawn arrived, Chen Ping'an got up and went to the kitchen, picking up a pole with buckets and preparing to go to the iron lock well in Apricot Blossom Alley to draw 2 buckets of water. The sleepy-eyed Lu Xianyang was still hiding inside his blankets, with only his head visible. When he heard the soft footsteps, he mumbled, "Chen Ping'an, you're up so early. Where are you heading to?" "I'm going to draw water." Chen Ping'an huffed. "If you see Ji Gui, don't forget to greet her for me," Lu Xianyang shouted. Chen Ping'an couldn't be bothered replying. Just as he was about to leave the courtyard, Chen Ping'an suddenly heard Lu Xianyang say, "Chen Ping'an, as long as you help me, I'll also help you dive for pebbles in the pit." A radiant smile spread across Chen Ping'an's face. "Sure thing." Lu Xianyang rolled his eyes as he pulled his blanket over his head. "Disloyal brat. I knew this would work." On the covered bridge, a middle-aged scholar was sitting alone. He would remain here until first light. When the first ray of light peeked over the horizon, he looked up and said with a faint smile, "A dark room for 1,000 years, a room illuminated with a single light."